The June 24th, 2025 meeting of the Dexter Township Planning Commission will now please come to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And just by way of introduction, and clearly we have a quorum, but usually to check quorum, I'll introduce the members of the Planning Commission. I am Marty Straub. On my left, your right, we've got Sean Smith, Alicia Abbott, Steve Birch, Chandra Hurd, Dan Barry, and Christy Mayer. So we are at full strength tonight. Conflict of interest review. Anybody have a conflict with our discussion item tonight? Hearing none, we'll move to approval of the agenda. Anybody want any changes? Hearing none, the agenda will be approved as presented. Public comment. Anyone who cares to address the Planning Commission, please step to the podium, the lectern, and we have to turn that mic on, Janice. Is that? And then if you would please state your name and address for the record.
Thanks. Joseph Spiegel, 7905 Sauer Drive, Gregory, Michigan. I am not going to repeat what I provided to the Planning Commission in my memorandum of June 23rd, 2025. I think it is a summary of my concerns with what had been proposed. It's difficult to balance all the interests of all the residents in Dexter Township. We know that. However, a vast majority of the Dexter residents want STRs strictly controlled. The Putnam ordinance, which I know you've all seen, and if you haven't, I'll send you another copy or send a copy to you, meets all the concerns, every single one of the concerns of the select committee, of this board, and the questions raised by the Board of Trustees. Every concern, whether it was insurance, whether it was numbers, whatever the concerns were, it meets each and every one of those concerns. So I did some research and I found out that Foster Swift, a law firm in Lansing, basically drafted that ordinance, which has been copied in a number of other communities. And I spoke with the township supervisor of Putnam Township. There have been no lawsuits, no litigation arising out of the Putnam Township ordinance. That is huge. It's important to this township. The enforcement provisions of the Putnam ordinance provide for due process. The Putnam ordinance basically says if you were not allowed to have an STR, you can just apply and meet all the conditions set forth in that ordinance. So those individuals that did show up to complain about any regulation of STRs, and they said, it's going to destroy my retirement. Well, that ordinance will not destroy their retirement. They just have to apply. It's that simple. Now, if they can't meet certain of the conditions, well, so be it. I don't think that that should be a detriment to all the other citizens in Dexter. Because it allows for someone to make an economic decision as to whether or not a short-term rental of their property makes sense. That is a foundation of America. You have to make your own economic decisions. If you're going to rent a piece of property, can you charge enough? Can you charge enough to make a profit? But what Putnam says, and what we have to say, is that STRs are a commercial profit-making enterprise. And that shouldn't cause a burden to the community. There's the NIMBY problem. Not in my backyard. If you talk to anyone about this, they may say, okay, a short-term rental is fine, but not in my backyard. Not in my backyard. That's a paradox. But that paradox, that problem, is cured by providing reasonable, rational regulation of STRs. What I found fascinating was the introduction to the Putnam ordinance. I attached it as part of my submission. I really encourage you to read and think about what they said. The future is here today. So when you make a decision as to what should be done for all the residents of Dexter Township, keep in mind the environment, what Dexter Township means to so many people. And finally, I have two maps here. You've seen them all, or seen them before. Here's the Putnam zoning map, and here's the Dexter zoning. Dexter and Putnam are basically the same. They have similar households, they have similar concerns, they have similar economic demographics. So I would encourage, as I have said in my memorandums, tweak the Putnam ordinance. Just tweak it. Essentially, it's a cut and paste job. It shouldn't cost a lot of money. It shouldn't cost a lot of concern. And to the extent that no one has sued over it, that's wonderful. Because it's going to save everyone, the taxpayers of Dexter Township, a lot of money. Anybody have any questions?
We don't engage in conversation during participation, but we appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Anybody else at this point? Hearing none, public comment will be closed. Just a question for Fletcher. I don't know that we have all seen the Putnam Township ordinance, that it has made its way to us. Could you please see that we get a copy of that, that everybody's got a copy of that, and we'll be more familiar with it for next meeting?
Absolutely. I will print out a copy for each one of you.
Thank you.
I think it's here, sent it June 16th of this month.
Yeah, and I don't,
Was it June 16th that you emailed Putnam Township memorandum to us?
I don't have anything.
I think it was provided in the package of the two of the persons of the select committee. And I think that Linda may have sent it in your materials. If not, I'll email it to
Okay.
Fletcher tonight, and he can give it to everyone.
Thank you.
I mean, I guess the committee had looked at that ordinance though, because it's in your chart, in the report. I presume you had looked at, that was one of the ones you looked at. I think.
But it doesn't contain the full ordinance.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, if we could get that placed. Okay, next item, public hearings. We have none. Action items, we have none. Brings us up to discussion item review and discussion of draft short-term rental ordinance language. So I would, and Fletcher, Megan, perhaps have some words. I would, above all, like us to understand, agree on what is our objective tonight. At a minimum, we're gonna need to forward on something that amends our current zoning ordinance to define what a short-term rental is. And then beyond that, we've got at least two directions we can go. One of them, we've got a draft in front of us. The other, we may want to put the brakes to that. So we can have a freewheeling discussion. We kind of had that last time. I'd like to kind of get a sense from us, and then I guess we can go to staff. But what we think our objective should be in tonight's discussion. I'll start. I would like to know, get some sense of this group. Are you for it or against it? Anybody care to chime in? I'm not asking for a straw vote. We're not going to take a vote during a discussion, but we could spend a couple of hours discussing one thing only to get to the end and say, yeah, never mind.
Well, I don't mind starting off just the discussion as chair of the short-term rental committee. I voted to move the report and recommendations forward with the acknowledgement that the short-term rentals exist out there. And I don't think that they're gonna go away if we do nothing. And with the lack of enforcement to make them go away, they will continue. Like I looked at Vrbo and Airbnb today, and there are a dozen to 20 existing right now, just on those two platforms. And if we do nothing, they will continue. And I want to make it clear though, that I am not promoting or an advocate or being the champion of any type of ordinance or recommendation. I just want to see enforcement one way or the other. I mean, just like Alicia had mentioned before, that we need some direction from the board that says, if we don't move this forward, we need an enforcement mechanism to handle what's currently out there. Or if we do move this forward, we need a strong enforcement mechanism that really has a handle on the legal STRs as we move forward. I mean, to me, it really comes down to enforcement. Just because I supported moving the recommendations and the report forward, like I said, doesn't mean that I am promoting or I'm an advocate for it at all. I just want to see that that is properly enforced, because I do feel for the township dealing with the nuisance side of the STRs. And I think no matter what way it goes, that there has to be a handle on that. Like that has to get handled. And I do know that the scope of this is much larger than what we're handling right now. The scope is very large, and I wish the master plan would have addressed it, because I feel like this is a huge public undertaking, much larger than what the committee did. And I'm shocked that there aren't more STR owners here tonight, that we could be moving something forward and there aren't any ST owners even here tonight. And I don't want to advocate something that there aren't any owners even here. it seems ridiculous in that regard. So those are my 2 cents.
Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in?
Mr. Chair, if I may, echoing Ms. Hurd's remarks, especially the appreciation of her efforts as chair of the short-term rental study committee, for want of a better term. I made my opinion regarding short-term rentals rather clear last meeting, and I have not changed my opinion. I am opposed to permitting short-term rentals in Dexter Township. And without reiterating all of my earlier arguments, it is essentially because we are commercializing residential property. I can't run a machine shop out of my house, so why should I be able to commercialize renting my house to entities that may not have an interest in the community? I am also very concerned about enforcement, and there are also other concerns like Multi Lakes Sewer Authority and their apprehension about being able to handle the additional load that would be provided by people in conducting short-term rentals, especially since those people may not understand the limitations of our sewer processing system or the septic systems which may be involved. Rather than continuing on, as I said, I was opposed to short-term rentals before, and I have not changed my mind. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I guess from the Putnam ordinance, just the summary that's here. They allow short-term rentals, but only in commercial districts or ag with 10+ acres, is
1 acre.
1 acre, okay. I guess I feel like where most of the issues come in is the lake districts, the lake residential. And I do, this information that we got from Linda Selbert, it's really amazing how close these houses are together. I mean, I feel like that would be an issue to have a short-term rental in a neighborhood like that. So I don't think they should be allowed in the lake residential. Whether or not they should be allowed in, other places in the township, which I've seen them, again, I looked on the Airbnb map, and there's some that seem like they're out in the middle of nowhere. So those might be less problematic than the ones on the lake, but on the lake, I don't see how you could have good enforcement in some instances, because a lot of the concerns raised are people partying. So if you have someone going at 11 p.m. at night, who are we going to get to go out there at 11 p.m. other than the sheriff? And, I don't know how effective that is to get them.
And
licensed.
if it's only due to noise, the noise ordinance, I think historically has been kind of difficult to enforce. You've got to stand there with your calibrated decibel meter from a certain distance, pointed a certain direction. And once they see the vehicle roll up, they'd have to be pretty stupid to still be making noise. So it's, if I could just add to, yeah, I think we think of these mostly in the context of lakes because that's where they would be most popular. And that picture shows our problems around the lake, that none of the lots shown conform to the past several zoning ordinances. Presently we have a ½ acre minimum if the lot is served by off-site sewage system, which most are, and 1 acre if it's an on-site sewage, septic tank and drain field. So I think that's another problem, just policy-wise, expanding the use of what already historically has been, it was a cottage turned into a house, but the lot is non-conforming, the setbacks are non-conforming, most cases the lot coverage is non-conforming, not adequate parking, I was not going to pontificate at this point, but we potentially will compound a lot of problems that really have plagued people around the lakes for generations.
Right, and I do think there's a complication with some of the lakes in the township, and that there's, several that are wholly within the township. Then I think like Portage is in 3 different townships. It's in Dexter, Hamburg, and Putnam. So you'd have, potentially have three different ordinances in different sections of the lake.
Mhm.
Which I had a question, I mean, can I ask Mr. Spiegel a question?
Sure, because I run this thing so loosely.
Do you live on a lake?
Yes,
Okay, and what lake are you on?
North Lake.
North Lake, okay. I guess one thing I was curious about was how much, to the extent that a lake has an HOA, how much control does the HOA have over whether or not there could be short-term rentals on your lake?
That's an interesting issue. There is no HOA on North Lake. And there are lakes that do have HOAs, and they have, shall we say, controlled or banned STRs. Some haven't. It's a very touchy issue. So an ordinance that provides for due process would affect everybody. An HOA may not, and I don't see North Lake having an HOA. I'm not sure there's any HOAs in Dexter Township,
I think
not lakes.
Portage has one, I think,
I think Portage.
I don't know.
and I think
Yes,
Half Moon Lake
Half
has
Moon
one,
does too.
yeah.
So I haven't read Half Moon Lake's bylaws. I mean, I got a pretty thick file there, and that's one thing I haven't read.
Okay, well, thank you.
No problem.
Anybody else?
I'll chime in briefly, try and keep it really brief. I mean, I recognize the comments that other folks have made regarding the practical issues such as sewer, the legal issues and all these concerns. And they are all part of trying to wade through this. The other element, though, that I am trying to learn as we read, listen, prepare for this, is I don't necessarily know that it's a black or white issue. The answer, in other words, is not necessarily the same for every district. Or is it? That's what I'm sort of trying to work through. We've already talked a little bit about some of the challenges with the lake's residential areas, but at the same time, like looking at Putnam's and some of these other agricultural concepts, the master plan refers to growth in the agritourism business. We do have allowances for bed and breakfasts. And so there is a zone in there which does look at the concept of commercialization of spending the night. And so that is something that I feel that we should be aware of, so that as we make this decision or whatever our recommendations are as we move forward, we recognize whether or not it is a black and white recommendation, or maybe we're able to work into this gray zone. And that's the area that I'm trying to explore.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'd like to just speak about this. It's been a roller coaster because I'm an avid user of short-term rentals. I don't like to stay in hotels. I want to cook my own food, so I use Airbnb frequently if I travel. But then when we waded into this issue, I started with seeing the people who showed up in October who had been operating for decades without incident that we knew of. As the process continued on, I started learning about the environment. And the other thing that we aren't able to really factor is when this catches up to us years down the road, can we turn it back in terms of the environmental standards? I had no idea that living on the lake, there was so much that you had to be really concerned about with the shoreline, the water runoff, having rain gardens. And Brenda here is a bevy of information on that. And so, like Chandra pointed out, people who are running short-term rentals aren't even here to speak for themselves. But I'm just kind of on the fence with just concerns about enforcement. I did kind of take the temperature with the board. Essentially, we have the money set aside in the budget for enforcement. But currently, enforcement is being handled by our full-time staff. but we're gonna need to do something, because if we do nothing on short terms, if we decide we're not gonna move this forward and have a public hearing and vote, then short-term rentals are gonna continue to exist. But I agree with Chandra that they're not gonna go away. But I don't know. I don't know if, you know, I feel like we're gonna, if the ordinances are so strict, we're gonna like one lady said at our meetings, that we're gonna price the little guy out of even being able to own a short-term rental. But I also don't think that's my problem, because when you look at the picture that Linda submitted in our email, she's here, by the way. That the houses are precariously close. And I just stayed in Nuevo County this past weekend. I just got home Sunday. I stayed in an Airbnb in a tiny little cute cottage on the lake, and it was a cottage that sat behind the main house that was occupied by the owner operator. But I could literally look out the window and reach out and touch the house next door, and I thought, wow, this is just weird, you know. So, you know, we have to really be thinking about how close these houses are together, and we should not forget that there are environmental impacts that we may not see until long down the road. And then how do we dial those back? So that's not really a yes or no answer, but just things that if we move forward, we need to be considerate.
Thank you. On the environmental impact, it kind of reminds me of the old days. I was elected Dexter Township trustee in 1980, and one of the big issues that we had at that time was the anti-keyholing ordinance. It was to keep somebody who bought a back lot from funneling, or might have had a subdivision on a back lot, but they owned one lot on the lake, and they funneled everybody from there into there, and effectively disturbed the riparian owners. If you want to live on the lake, you know, buy on the lake. I get it why this is attractive. That's also why we have, you know, parks. But that was a big deal at the time, and part of it was the environmental harm that was the concern of, you know, in environmental harm. But the more I think about that, we're kind of, you know, back 45 years ago where we are discussing something that will funnel more people into the lakes, more activity into the lakes on this time an artificial basis. You know, presumably everybody in these outlots, the subdivision, the novelty of the lake is going to wear off, and they'll use it once in a while. But when we're bringing people in for the sole purpose of vacationing here, we really are funneling more people into the lakes, creating situations that our residents may find uncomfortable, disturbing, hinders their ability to enjoy their property. Anybody else have anything?
Yes, I would like to say that although I haven't decided my position finally on this, things resonate with me, such as Commissioner Birch's comments at our last meeting, which I think it's a fair point that in effect, any STR ordinance is spot zoning. And it's effectively creating a tiny zone within another zone, which disrupts the nature of the larger zone. I feel that the importance of neighborhood, knowing your neighbors and having community in that neighborhood is an important part that's mentioned in the master plan. And I feel that STRs are problematic in that sense. I'm glad to hear that there is an avenue perhaps for enforcement if it's not fully realized yet. But there perhaps is a way to enforce it. I'm glad to hear that. But I think, the big thing, for me is spot zoning and the nature of neighborhoods. Those are the two big concerns that I don't feel, can be addressed, especially in the lake zones.
Thank you. Just kind of following up on that, I also liked Commissioner Birch's example of, I could have a machine shop in my garage. And I have empathy for those people who have been doing this for decades. But you could have had a machine shop in your garage for decades, and until the vibration and the noise and the traffic and the smell and the whatever else bothered your neighbor, you got away with it. And it was never legal. STRs were never legal. As much empathy as I may have for people who have built part of their income on it, they never were legal. And as far as enforcement goes, yeah, I appreciate the comment that STRs are here to stay. I think they're here to stay. I'm not sure they're here to stay in Dexter Township, because the same enforcement mechanism that's going to make sure that you're in compliance with, a big long ordinance is going to be the enforcement mechanism that the township will have to use. And I guess looking back on it, should have used years ago to nip these things in the bud. So it's, I think we are at a crossroads here, and we can decide to pursue them, or we can decide, and it's not, to me, not just kicking the can down the road. We can come to an understanding that for Dexter Township at this time, this doesn't seem like a good idea to us, and somebody, township, will have to sort out a lot of details about how they untangle themselves from something that the township is really let grow. And not any particular board. I was happier when these were kind of out of sight, out of mind, and problems were dealt with on an ad hoc basis, but we can no longer do that. In fact, we have to handle the application for zoning text amendment one way or the other, regardless. And that I guess, thinking about it, needs to get on a future agenda. We're not able to deal with that tonight. We did kick that one down the road while the committee was doing their thing, but that still has to come back to us. The people paid their money and made their application. And I think all we did was put it off. But anyhow, I digress. Just look into that and see. I think we do have a piece of unfinished business that we have to dispose of. And in fact, those people, that wasn't our proposal. The people that made the application had a whole zoning text, which to my reading wouldn't have solved their problem anyhow, but that's.
I can
beside
comment.
the point.
Mr. Chair, you're correct.
Please.
Correct that eventually you will have to make a decision about whether to recommend that or something else in terms of short-term rentals to the township board. So that could be put as an action item on your next agenda. But if you're interested in looking at what the board thinks, maybe if you have a vote on the zoning ordinance amendments that are before you, then essentially empower a short-term rental ordinance or not, then that might be a way to take the temperature of the room, or to look at that before diving into a lot of things on the ordinance itself, if there's really not support for the ordinance itself.
Yes, thank you. And I think we're trying to kind of feel our way through that. It would not be appropriate for us to take a vote, a straw vote, or anything else, because we explicitly stated this was only going to be for discussion tonight. But I think as we talk our way through some of these issues, we can kind of, get a handle on this particular proposal in front of us. And then as we get to the end of that, we probably need a discussion with you guys about, okay, now what? So what is it we're gonna take to our next meeting, which presumably is gonna be a public hearing on something? Even if it's just, here's the definition of short-term rental, and here's, what we plan on doing with them. Megan, the other part, not, big discussion for right now, but I think because we have a petition in front of us where people paid their money and said, here's what we propose. I think that's just an up or down vote when we bring that back up. It's not something we can modify and send on. They gave us a specific request, and we will yay or nay that based on, a vote when the time comes. We won't modify that one and try to turn it into something else, I think. But you guys can guide us through that when the time comes. So we've kind of had philosophical discussion about STRs in general. Anybody care to go through the report again? And last time we didn't really have much of an opportunity to go through the draft ordinance. But I don't want to, couple of things. I don't want to telegraph that we're going one way if that's not the intent of this body. And also no point taking a lot of people's time going through minuscule details of this, of which I see many, if there isn't a general idea that what's before us is going to be something we would want to promote, even if we modify it a bit. So anybody have any thoughts on that, or should we just dive into this and take it page by page and then regroup when we get to the end?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Birch?
if I may, earlier I said that I was opposed to short-term rentals in Dexter Township, and I am maintaining that position. But I am not opposed to Dexter Township developing an ordinance to deal with short-term rentals, even if it is in the extreme, not permitting them. And to me, to overuse an overused term, the 500-pound gorilla in the room is that we have got to deal with short-term rentals. And so we're going to have to, whatever collectively we recommend to the township board, I think we should take into account Putnam Township's ordinance to give us another source of information. And that, coupled with a review of what we already have, I think we can probably more expediently pursue an ordinance recommendation that we think will be satisfactory to Dexter Township.
Okay, so thank you for that. What is your recommendation of how we proceed tonight? We're not ready to discuss anything outside of what's in our packet. For example, the Putnam Township ordinance.
That is correct. What trying to discern what you said earlier, if we were to discuss the ordinance we have in front of us and at that time make a decision whether to promote or contradict this ordinance, might be to our advantage. And if it is not to support this ordinance, maybe get some idea of what we may want to develop to recommend to the township board.
So it seems like there may be benefit, if nothing else, us kind of clarifying our own collective thoughts by going through this. I don't know that we need to go through the report again. There were some comments that I had some questions or comments about, but the actual action that we would take would be centered on the proposed ordinance, so maybe we just go through that page by page and see what comments people have. Anybody object to that?
I'm sorry, did you say the report or the ordinance?
The ordinance, because the report is largely the basis for the ordinance. And some of it's redundant. We have the past, I don't know, past meeting or two, had an opportunity to go through the report, but not much opportunity to go through the proposed ordinance.
I think the report, then we've seen the report, so.
Okay,
So when you say ordinance, what page are you looking at?
well, of the packet, it's page 59 of 106. The ordinance page itself, first page is 1, and it's not. There's a couple of things. We would have to incorporate into the zoning ordinance the definition of short-term rental, but this ordinance would be a proposed township ordinance outside of the zoning ordinance. So there's a couple of things that we would do if we were going forward on that. So if we want to jump in, if everybody's got page 59 of their packet. So the first proposed change is add a section to define short-term rentals. And what's proposed here, short-term rental, a commercial activity consisting of renting a dwelling or unit for a term of not more than 30 nights. The lawful rental of the following shall not be considered short-term rentals: bed and breakfast establishments, motels, campgrounds, transitional houses operated by a charitable organization, group homes such as nursing homes and adult foster care homes, substance abuse rehabilitation clinics, mental health facilities, and other similar healthcare related facilities. And I would just point out, you guys correct me if I say something wrong here, but the commercial activity consisting of renting a dwelling unit not more than 30 nights, because beyond 30 nights, it's not a short-term rental and it's somebody leasing their property for a longer term. It doesn't fall into this at all then.
Mr. Chair, just
Please.
because the Putnam ordinance has been brought into the conversation, I will point out that their definition of short-term rental had 27 nights and not 30.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? On that
Please.
definition, can you add after more than 30 nights? Can you add or less than 3 nights?
If I could just jump in there, the less than 3 is part of the regulation, the restrictions elsewhere, that it would have to be a minimum of 3. As the short-term rental, I think the gist of it is anything
Under 30.
anything 30 days or under would be a short-term rental. Now, how we regulate that would be part of what you're getting at.
Mr. Chair, can I just add one thing about definitions, is that we should try to keep regulation out of definitions. So for instance, that minimum of 3 nights,
Mhm.
that's a regulation, so you're saying it has to be that. So to put it in the definition can become problematic later.
No,
Yeah,
I
thank you,
didn't
'cause
understand that. Thank you. I didn't know that before.
And then I think the next thing is on page 3, just listing short-term rentals as a permitted use. Now, this part of it is all referencing zoning ordinance sections, correct?
Yes.
And same thing on page 4, short-term rentals in a couple of places as a
Chair,
permitted use.
H2,
Mhm, Sure.
where short-term rental is listed in the table. And where it's a permitted use under the following districts. And that conservation district has that question mark, and it's
Thank
just
you.
something that we can
Thank you, yeah.
keep in our discussions moving forward, but I know that would have to be addressed if we move forward. That's why there's a question mark.
Yeah, what do we have for RC should be
For
recreation
recreation,
conservation, right?
That's recreation.
What do we have that might be privately owned, other than public land.
There are some dwelling units in conservation.
Yes, and,
There are some dwelling units.
and,
Specifically, there's like a cluster on Island Lake Road, with some privately owned houses and properties.
and I think there's also one of the camps, I don't want to say the wrong camp, but I think one of the camps was bought and redeveloped. That may still be RC, but there's some
And,
residences on it.
The area of Claves Marine, what used to be Claves Marina, is also RC.
Their particular property, I think, is RR, which seemed kind of weird. Megan, I don't know if you remember when we got into the Wonderland Marina and their sign request. Was that not RR, I'm sorry, that was Lake Residential, right? That particular property, something around that might be RC, I don't recall, or never knew.
The land between the marina and getting over towards the yacht club, I think it's that sort of slightly undeveloped area. I'm just trying to look at the itty bitty little
Yeah.
spots in here. But I think that is generically the area of the RC.
Okay.
Going back to some of our initial discussion also, I mean, this does allow, it's permitted in the Lakes residential. To me, that's the big elephant in the room. I mean, if it was up to me, I would vote to strike that in residential and leave it in ag and rural residential and commercial.
While I am probably okay with that
That's where most of. the
Essentially,
short-term rental
yeah, that is-
units are
right.
Right now.
yeah, all the I shouldn't say all, because I don't have the facts, but I would hazard to say almost all 90+% of what we're dealing with is going to be in the Lake residential area. And yeah, while I think I share your sentiment that that's where the problems are, that's also where the requests are and why it's before us.
Who would make the decision to either leave it in or take it out?
Well, we would make the decision about what we recommend to the township board, who could do whatever they want with it when
But that's another.
it gets to them. That would be presumably, and Lecture, maybe it'd be good if you could walk us through what we think the timeline could possibly be, given that the Board of Trustees has modified their meeting schedule a little bit. So originally, let's say a couple of weeks ago, plan was we're discussing this tonight. At our July meeting, we would have a public hearing on something. That would then go to the August something or another township board, but not their regularly scheduled meeting, I think.
At 6 o'clock, a public hearing.
Right, so, possible scenario is, the planning commission sets a public hearing for the July meeting for the zoning ordinance portion of, this draft ordinance. Planning commission would make a recommendation to the board based on discussions of both the zoning ordinance and the general ordinance. In August, there would be a board meeting to discuss both of those ordinances, but no action would be taken. It would essentially be a public hearing just to get additional comments from the public. September would most likely be when action would occur, what direction the board would take with the recommendation of the planning commission.
All right, thank you. And then further to Commissioner Mayor's comment. Yeah, while I think I'm in general agreement with your thought process, I don't necessarily aside from what I might think about this whole thing being a good idea, if we're going to get down to details, I don't necessarily think that Lake Residential District ought to be treated differently than any place else. But I do think that the only place that might possibly be appropriate is going to be those that have no pre-existing nonconformities. And that probably as a practical matter self-eliminates almost all the properties that are being short-term rented now.
Well, and I guess, one thing, because I was looking at different ordinances from different places or just suggestions of what you could do. We stayed at an Airbnb over on a lake in Chelsea a couple years, and it's a lakefront property, very nice lake, but we were very far from our neighbors. I mean, like, not, 10 feet, but at least 50 feet on each side of the house. I mean, you could put distance in there also, like say you have to have at least a half an acre, or you have to have at least, which I think that would essentially eliminate Portage Lake, but there, there could be places in the township that have, for some reason, someone has a big lot that is, 50 feet on each side from their neighbor, where they could then have a Airbnb. But, essentially it would lock out other people that don't have that distance.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm thinking also, that if you have a lot that conforms with Lake Residential, most of those are gonna be on sewer, so let's deal with, that would be a half acre minimum lot size, and then you have to conform with all of the setbacks, and odds are, I mean, we've got so much of everything around here, it's hard to make a blanket statement, but odds are, if they already are on a half an acre, they already have everything else that they need, front yard setback, rear yard setback, et cetera. Probably have adequate parking. So that would seem more reasonable to me. And
Mr. Chair,
yes, please.
if I may interrupt, the township zoning ordinance allows non-conforming lots to be used, or to have permitted and special land uses used on those non-conforming lots. So we can't exclude uses just because the lots may be non-conforming.
However.
I think we can.
However, what you can do is say that a particular use needs to have a certain minimum lot size and minimum lot width. And that would be a different zoning mechanism to get to the same result.
Okay, thank you. Because yeah, I don't mean to dispute what you're saying. I get what you're saying. We've got a chart and but however we achieve that, yeah, I don't think we ought to be entertaining this on properties that already are crunched. And they evolved that way, and I get it, but we as a township shouldn't help make those issues worse than they already are. Having said that, I don't think that satisfies everybody's issue either. But it does provide a path for somebody doing this, that a path to legality, let's say, if the township should decide that they want to go forward with STRs. I think there's a path of making STRs legal, but not creating more problems. Now, having said that, I'm still not convinced that this is a good idea for Dexter Township. Even, yeah, agritourism, whatever. There is a way to do something similar through a bed and breakfast, which is allowed already under, certain circumstances, certain conditions. I don't know that short-term rental is necessary to do that, and agritourism, while that is a desired goal, I don't know that automatically means that somebody has to come stay at a house out in Dexter Township.
Chair, may I
Please.
just trying to understand the current mechanisms? And you had just mentioned the bed and breakfast, and I've been trying to figure out when's the right time to raise this question. So this is probably a question directed towards staff. I'm just trying to understand. Right now, under the zoning code, in special land uses, bed and breakfast is listed for just about every one of our districts.
Correct.
So if that's the case, can somebody apply for a bed and breakfast anywhere? granted, they have to go through the special land use review process.
If the question is, could one of these houses around the lake that presently is short-term rental, could somebody operate that as a bed and breakfast?
Effectively, that's,
The short answer is yes, there'd be a lot more paths to do that than short-term rental.
right. And so if that, well, so go ahead. That's-
I was just gonna say, the big difference with the bed and breakfast and short-term rentals is that the bed and breakfast is owner occupied. The owner's gonna be there with the guests staying, you know, upstairs in a room.
And don't we specify that they have to serve one meal? I don't know if it's necessarily breakfast, but there
was something in
there's
there
some
about.
elements
meal,
to it
yeah.
that,
Whether it's they
yeah.
have to serve one or they can only serve one, there was
Something
something
like
about
that,
meals.
yeah.
But what I'm kind of getting at is between that, the master plan talks about addressing accessory dwelling units that right now could potentially be converted over STRs, that there is one very narrow zone area where maybe if people that lived on a lake who have an accessory dwelling unit wanted to either live in it and let some people rent the house or vice versa, so it becomes owner occupied. The thing that I'm trying to get at is, right now, under our current code, is that actually a way to legally do this?
Yes, and that's what's been, that was what was originally told to the person who was found in violation last summer, is they were told you can apply as a bed and breakfast. And they were looking at that and found it that infeasible, and instead decided to file for requests to change the zoning ordinance text. Again, as what Fletcher said, a lot of times technically what becomes difficult with the short-term rental online platforms, expectations versus the bed and breakfast is that it's owner occupied, and that the service of a meal. And then also it's how does the township enforce that and go through that. But it is, you are correct that that is a mechanism that's available now to anyone who's operating something that is like a short-term rental, that they could operate it as a bed and breakfast. If they came in, got the special land use, met all the special land use regulations and met the regulations for the bed and breakfast, and there's about 10 of them, Fletcher?
Bed and breakfast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
10 regulation.
Well, I think the specific question though got to if you had an auxiliary dwelling unit, and what we dealt with previously and what we dealt with in the master plan is typically it's going to be the space over the garage, let's say, and that was a way to keep families together. There's either a kid who is almost ready to leave the nest, or there's a parent or somebody who needs to be brought, back into the family unit, but it's a separate building. Under our current definition of bed and breakfast, could the owners of this lakefront house with a dwelling unit above the garage, let's say, could they move out to the garage for a week and operate the front house as a bed and breakfast? I think our definition doesn't really address that because it talks about occupying a dwelling unit or something, and these are two separate dwelling units. Not to say that we couldn't modify that and at least be a step in the direction in some cases that, that may accomplish what people are trying to accomplish. But specifically, we did not, and I think I raised that once or twice when we were going through the master plan. We did not intend for that to be a mechanism to where people could move to the back house for the summer and rent the front house. That's not to say that they couldn't, because I don't think we have anything in here that prevents that. Other than it would then be a short-term rental.
Right.
But it's not, it wasn't the intention that, oh, we just brought more people onto the property that are then gonna, use the lake. It was a family unit even if it doesn't explicitly require that. It kind of violated the intent. We weren't trying to pack more people in there. We were trying to allow people to stay in their homes longer.
So just something else to think about too. When I was in my twenties, a girlfriend and I, we rented a home on Whitmore Lake for 9 months because the owners like to have it during the summer, and we rented it from September to April. And you can always rent your home out for the summer for 31 days, you know, and do it in monthly chunks. And when I was looking at the Airbnb today, you noticed a lot of the short-term rentals in Dexter Township right now, we're averaging about 5-day rentals and getting anywhere from $500 to $2,000 for 5 days. So that was significant income, significant. But I also know they would get significant income if they rented out by the month or by the summer. Like 1 month guaranteed you would get at least $3,000 if you rented a cottage out for a month for the summer, and you wouldn't be violating anything, just renting out your home for 31 days. So it's not like we're truly taking away full income without any type of STR regulations, because you can still rent out these cottages just for longer term.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that point. And that's kind of the balance between the, in general, I think somebody ought to be able to do with their property whatever they want. And then there's an asterisk on there, except, when it goes against the law or it encroaches upon their neighbors' rights, blah, blah, blah. It just so happens that this does encroach upon the law, so, we can address that, but yes, what you just mentioned is kind of the balance between the real concern that comes with short-term rentals is the short-term part of it. We've got people that are kind of transient coming through the township, coming out to the lakes. And that can set up a conflict with the neighbors. But yes, I think you raise a good point about how that can kind of be balanced a bit. We wouldn't be saying, nope, nobody can do anything. They always have the option of over 30 days. Okay, do we want to keep moving here? So yeah, page 2, thank you. I had missed that little red question mark, and that would have to be part of a larger conversation should we want to move forward on that. Well, as Commissioner Mayer mentioned, so would the permitted use under Lake Residential. I think that brings us up to page 5, which is page 63 of the packet. Add section 1704, blah, 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 to cross-reference short-term rental ordinance. And that adds T, short-term rentals. Short-term rentals shall meet the standards listed below, in addition to the standards listed in the Dexter Township General Ordinance number 45, short-term rental regulations, which doesn't exist yet. That's part of what we're dealing with. And then underneath that, 1, a short-term rental shall not be used for special events at any time, including but not limited to weddings, parties, or large gatherings on the premises. Number 2, short-term rental shall comply with the sign requirements outlined in Article 19 for uses permitted in residential districts, regardless of whether the short-term rental is located in a non-residential district. On item 1, I had a question of large gatherings. How's that defined? The proposed ordinance addresses 10 people. I'm not sure that, or more than 10 people. I forget now what it says.
It's just gonna say somewhere it said 10 plus people.
Yeah, so we probably need to tie that together or define large gathering. But it also kind of raised the point, just kind of the practicality. Somebody wanting to get together for the weekend for a 1-year-old's birthday party, for example. You might have 4 or 5 people that are running the place, but you're going to get 20 people there. Are we saying that? Scratch that. Is this saying that that would not be permitted? And I think between this and the 10 elsewhere in the ordinance, I think we're saying that, yeah, that would not be permitted.
Not be permitted.
Okay.
In my questionings about, again, the agritourism, et cetera, if you're on a 2-acre parcel and someone is wanting to do something, then is a limit necessary? Or not, well, not necessary, that's not the question. Is it limiting or too limiting? I suppose maybe not. If realistically someone's wanting to operate a facility like that, it would be commercial, whether it's a bed and breakfast or something else. So
But
they'd
we
be
get into-
regulated that
Then we
way.
get more into party barn activity maybe
Yeah.
than
And that's not a short-term rental.
right?
That's a business. This is someone's home. Really, that's, I think, what it comes down to. We're looking at this very narrow definition of it's someone's home where they're not there and they're letting people stay and do stuff. So, yes, there should be some type of limitation on the numbers.
Anybody have anything else on that page? We flip the page down at the bottom. This is page 6, page 64 of the packet. We add short-term rental to the parking space, minimum parking space chart. It says parcels with a valid short-term rental license shall comply with the parking requirements for a single-family dwelling not located in a lake residential district unless the parcel is located within a lake residential district, in which case the requirements for a single-family dwelling in a lake residential district shall apply. See ordinance 45, that's the so far non-existent ordinance for additional short-term rental requirements. So that's just acknowledging a parking requirement for STRs. Anybody have anything on that?
I will say that the parking requirements are the limiting factor in the general ordinance for these special events. So if they're exceeding their parking requirements, parking on the street, parking off of the property, they would be in violation of the proposal and be subject to penalties based on that. But like the commission has been stating, enforcement would be a big part of this because, you know, things could happen at 11:30 at night on a Saturday and only the sheriff would be available at that time.
And
Well,
I-
unless you post your phone number.
Unless they put me on a 24-hour call, yeah.
And personally, my concern there would be if we're doing this, the party bus only takes up one parking space, but shows up with however many people you can pack into a party bus. So I don't know that I would want to rely on parking to be the limiting factor.
Although I think in parking, do we define the size of the space? Party bus would take up more than one conventional space, but I don't know that that helps your concern any. Yeah, still, all of a sudden, yeah, bus shows up, parking space. Let's say they've got 3 parking spaces, bus shows up, that's still a problem.
You can get a lot of kids in
Yeah.
a VW bug, so.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
And the
but
bus
party
might
bus,
just drop
certainly.
off and go park down the road.
Yeah,
So I guess what
Yeah.
I feel, sort of what I'm saying is if we're going to set a limit, I feel like we should find a very objective way to set a limit. Enforceable way to set a limit. That's my other little question mark, is always the legal question mark, but I think that underlies anything that we do.
anybody have anything else on that page? Okay, page 8, I think, is our next, and this is just the table of permits. So short-term rentals is added and does not require a permit. But we have B, C, D, and E, and footnotes D and E are new. This goes on to page 9, page 67 of the packet. So D, short-term rentals, no special events. Properties operating as a short-term rental are not permitted to have special events included, but not limited to weddings, parties, or large gatherings take place on the premises. See ordinance number 45 for the additional short-term rental requirements. And E, license required for certain uses or activities. A license issued by the township is required for full authorization to operate where specified in this ordinance. Separate license or approval must be obtained in addition to any otherwise required permits before the use or activity may commence. Anybody have any issues with that, comments? Okay, then starting on, well, the cover sheet actually, starting on page 68 of the packet is the proposed isn't perhaps the right word. It's what is before us as a potential ordinance number 45. That would be an actual Dexter Township ordinance outside of the zoning ordinance. So everything in this document is new. I don't think it serves a real purpose for me to read all the words in this new document, but if we want to go through page by page and people have comments, I'll start with page 2 of the ordinance, page 69 of the packet. Anybody have anything on this? And this is just kind of the preamble, laying out the title, the purpose, and the first few definitions. Next page, page 3, more definitions, and that's where special event is defined. For the purpose of this ordinance, a special event shall be an organized gathering of 10 or more people for a specific purpose and limited duration. Special events may include, but are not limited to, weddings, family reunions, parties, or similar large gatherings. Page 4. I had a question. So page 4, we get into section 4 is rental registration and license required. A is registration and license required. B is implementation requirements and conditions. Number 1 under B is initial license period. 2 is septic system inspection. And it says a current septic inspection dated within the last 3 years must be submitted from a certified inspector. The report must indicate that the system is functioning properly and is adequate for the intended short-term rental occupancy. And my question for staff, I guess, is as determined by whom? I was on the County Board of Health for, I don't know, a bunch of years, 12, 14, something like that, and used to engage in a lot of discussion about, is a septic system in a state of failure, imminent failure? It's never going to be, how do I want to say that? They're not presumed to be good forever and ever, but this seems to be a value judgment. Who determines adequate? What are the qualifications of the inspector that say it's adequate for the intended short-term rental occupancy?
You have 2 choices on that. You could either ask the county board of health to assist with that. When you have a new home built, they'll sign off on the septic system or the ability of the soils.
Do you happen to notice, anybody happen to know, I mean, way back many years ago, the county health department was going to get involved requiring inspections for the transfer of property. Do you know, is that a thing?
I don't think that they do that.
Okay.
But also then, if the county board of health is not a good option, because they could eliminate that staff at any time. You can also say that the township would hire somebody to review that inspection post qualifications, and that would be part of the fee.
And I don't know where you find those people other than in a county health department or a city health department, but I think those qualifications, you need to be a registered sanitarian with, you know, expertise in this area, but we don't have to beat that one anymore tonight. I think this is kind of ambiguous and one of those things that would need to be tightened up for it to be workable.
Sure. I can also extend that question out to our engineering consultant, see if they
Oh,
have
great,
anyone
yeah.
on staff
Yep.
who has expertise in that field.
Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, now that you mention that, I'm sure they do.
Mr. Chair, I think also there was a letter from the manager of Multi Lakes Water and Sewer,
We may
Mhm.
need to.
which,
or two.
yeah.
for
Which,
septic.
yes, which addressed some of the septic questions, mentioning the possibility of a need for a flow meter on an STR as part of their licensing.
You know, yeah, that's a real good issue, I think, because this refers to septic system, which to me is, you know, on site, you've got a septic tank and a drain field, as opposed to, you know, what we've got in a couple of public sewer systems in the township, and that isn't addressed in here at all.
I think that would have to be another
Addition.
additional item under this.
That makes sense to me. Okay. Anybody have anything else on page 4?
I do under this renewal.
Okay.
Go ahead, Megan, ask your question.
I just wanted to ask if, so two things. Number one, there may be some things in the Putnam Township model that deal with some of the things that are coming up. So part of your direction at the end of this night could be also that we would, to direct us to look at that, and if there was anything applicable based on the conversation, to insert those in. 1, 2, based on your conversation that you just had, do you want to add in another number, and this may be what you were going to say, Planning Commissioner Hurd, to have, require a sign off from a sewer authority? That they have to, the applicant has to submit some sort of letter from the sewer authority authorizing that they have the adequate facilities and, capacity at that site for a short-term rental?
You know, basically based on the letter from the director of the Multi Lakes Water and Sewer Authority, they are gonna wanna have some type of review and possible fee structure, you know, metering specifically for an STR, so something in regard that it addresses what they'll be discussing at a future meeting. And we might not know until July or August at one of their future meetings.
Yeah.
So,
Was there some discussion once upon a time, maybe Commissioner Birch recalls, about, were there certain conditions that some property owners had to have, like a spare grinder pump or something like that? I vaguely recall some discussion, but I don't know if it was even at Planning Commission as far as that goes.
To the best of my recollection, that was never a topic within the context of BC.
Okay. Cause that might even be, you know, somebody, if the thing conks out on a busy rental weekend, something might need to be addressed there outside of, you know, what we would typically get into. But that could be a requirement from the sewer authority, I suppose.
so I just wanted to point out under renewal. It would be nice if this section were clarified as well as it could be, and I'm just looking at the last 4 lines of page 71. And it says, if documented concerns that the property was not compliant, and I don't know if it should say if documented concerns that have been recorded that the property was not compliant with the terms of this ordinance during the initial period, but were not sufficient to warrant denial of a renewed license, Like, what would that be? If it's not compliant, it's not compliant. So what would be not sufficient to warrant denial? Like, what it would be an example of that?
there's major issues and minor issues.
I know, but is that like, just come to the discretion of the
yeah, it would
director of
be-
planning and
Yeah.
zoning? Of,
You could put in language around what was major or minor. I think, can't quite remember where this portion came from. But it was just added extra flexibility for someone who had an incident once, they fixed it, and then they were a good actor for the rest of the time. You could absolutely take that out. And then, and then just not allow that type of discretion.
alright, I'm just thinking
Or-
if there's documented concerns, you know, but then you get to kind of choose whether this person gets
Yeah.
to.
Also, there may be instances where someone has a short-term rental, it's operating legally, the person next door just doesn't like it, and they call and complain all the time, but the short-term rental is operating within compliance.
Okay. I just wanted some examples of
Yeah.
what that would look like.
So,
Or we could take it the direction of like, restaurant inspections, which could, I mean, that could be very complicated, but they do have major and minor. A minor one might be the soap dispenser next to the hand wash station happen to be empty. A major one would be, oh, your refrigerator's keeping everything at 55 degrees. So there may be some, if the objective is kind of take it out of the value judgment, but apply some consistency to it. I don't know. That could become very complicated, but it also might make things, pretty clear. I appreciate your point about what are the things we're thinking of here. That would be shame on you, but yeah, we're gonna give you a license again anyhow.
I don't like the part where if they're compliant for 1 year and everything goes well with their first permit, that then they can do a 3-year renewal. A lot can happen in 3 years. I feel like that might make us a little more vulnerable as a township, allowing someone to run amok for 3 years before it's discovered. So maybe we could change that. I just think permit should either be annual or buy-in, every other year.
It makes sense to me.
Good point.
alright, should we make it annual?
Sure.
And then, because the money they pay for the permit is what is the cost, it goes to the cost of enforcement. I mean, I know that's not economical for the operator, but they're the ones who need to be paying for the cost of investigating and improving the. I do think annual it'd be easier to catch stuff and stop it before it becomes a big problem.
So then I think what we would do is change one to license period, and then all short-term licenses shall be issued by the planning director for annually for 1 year.
Yeah.
Anybody have anything else on page 71? Okay, page 72, up at the top, change in ownership. The change in ownership shall require the new owner to re-register the short-term rental under their name and submit all required documentation for review. Upon approval, the new owner shall be subject to a new 1-year probationary period beginning on the date the license is issued. Now, that part of it maybe doesn't mean anything if these are going to be 1-year renewals anyhow, but question for staff, how does something like that actually work? For example, a home is in a trust. What constitutes a change in ownership? One of the family members dies, so now it's, different makeup of the same people. Somebody gets married, a new trustee comes in, or on a more commercial basis, you've got a partnership or you've got a small corporation. Shareholders come and go. How would the township deal with that? I get it on the conventional sense. You know, Joe sells to Mary, that's clear change in ownership, but you could have a form of ownership that is totally invisible to the township and to the county register of deeds.
Well, I think mainly when you come in and apply, the license will be under the property owner's name. So any change, even
What
if there's a
what if
death
the
of a
owner is
family.
ABC LLC?
Well, if it were to change LLCs, they would need to reapply under the new one. And I
Right, but
think
the
even if
ownership
there was a-
underneath that could be you, and next year could be you and me, next year could be, I don't know how. And maybe that's overthinking it a bit, because that would be the less usual case. But I think what we need to prepare ourselves for is that there are commercial ventures that do this. And my guess is that even if somebody owns 5, each one of those is probably its own LLC. So they limit exposure to the whole operation. And you could, buy and sell the LLC, be really invisible to the township. Now, maybe you'd have to have, kind of like when you register a business with the state, maybe what the township could do is have a registered owner or a registered agent, something like that. That would be independent of what form the ownership is in, but then that's one more thing somehow you have to monitor.
If you've agreed that you don't have a 3-year renewal period, that it's on an annual basis, then I think this number 4 changing.
Totally moot point.
Could be removed. And that's what I would recommend.
That makes a lot of sense. Yep. Okay.
Well, my thought on that change of ownership was, I own a house, I've got a permit, I sell my house to Christie. The permit shouldn't transfer to her, but it shouldn't be a slam dunk for her to get that permit, because if we were to do caps, like say 1% for the township, then we would have a waiting list of people who want a STR permit. So if I sell my house to Christie and I have an existing permit, she shouldn't get that just because she bought my house. It should go to the next person on the waiting list.
But that is why there are people who are probably 110 years old that have seats at the 50-yard line at U of M Stadium.
Okay.
For every rule, somebody will figure out a novel way that Fletcher will be an old man before he catches up with them all.
But that is a valid point, the concept of just non-transferable.
Mhm.
Yeah. But then would that mean, if somebody didn't figure out a way to circumvent all that, would that mean that, I don't know, pick a number, we've got a limit of 10, that one sells. So the person who was on the waiting list at spot 11 now gets a license, and once that place sells, if they want to do it, they've got to go back to the bottom of the list.
They remember that no one gets a license, if they don't, meet the criteria. But I just don't wanna, if they're renewing their permit every year, then I think that might be a little more difficult for someone to just keep a permit in their name, yet sell the house to somebody else, because somebody's gotta reapply for that, to ask for that renewal.
Well, that's kind of an interesting question, I think. All on its own, is the permit in the name of a person, or is the permit attached to that property?
That's what I really don't know, and in my memory of looking at these, and I don't know, and I would defer to the short-term rental committee members. Did you see anything in those ordinances where it specifically said the license was non-transferable?
I don't recall.
I don't recall. What brought this up to me is that I read an article, and this was long before short-term rentals was even an issue here. And it was about a California town where the majority of the homes were short-term rentals, and they came in and they did some new ordinances, and one of them was to limit the amount of short-term rentals allowed in the downtown area. And they had a long waiting list, and if you sold your house but had an existing STR permit, it didn't go to the new owners. The new owners went to the bottom of the waiting list. So if the next person on the list, if their home complied, if their home didn't, then.
So I would think that would need to be explicit in the ordinance, and then I would like and we would probably need to consult with the township attorney.
Right.
Sure. Another thing too, the short-term rental committee emphasized, not allowing, major corporate ownership of these short-term rentals to have local residents of the township, be the majority owners of this. So I think if there was a provision to have, these licenses not run with the land, but be on a case-by-case basis for the owner for that specific property, we would avoid kind of creating that unintended consequence of corporations buying up the property just because there's a license on file for that property.
My other concern with it again is it's the secondary market it generates. All of
Yeah.
a sudden, that one property is worth a lot more than its neighbors. And now that goes in the tax records as the sale of the house because of the value of that short-term rental permit. Now everybody's taxes are impacted, or again, we're not only spot zoning, we're spot one property at a time. And it's having its valuations.
Aren't our property taxes, based on how we use our property though? Cause then we have the Ash property, it's rated commercial, but because he farms on it, it's actually taxed at agricultural rates.
That kind of sounds familiar. However, from a previous life, I am also aware that property is supposed to be taxed at 1/2 the state equalized valuation, 1/2 its actual value, the true arm's length transaction price. And I think in that case, if a place next to you sells because it's a short-term rental, that would then, regardless of how it's going to be used in the future, I am not an assessment expert, but way back in the late 80s, I think it was, when a lot of places were being sold on land contract, when the interest rates, maybe it was mid-80s, when interest rates were so high, people were selling their homes, their property on land contract, but that had an artificially high price because they could only charge so much interest. And there was litigation throughout Michigan, I think the Supreme Court ended up resolving it, that all of that was inflated. So I think there is the potential for that kind of gumming up the works.
And I was actually thinking more based on the comparables that the real estate people pull all the time, which that's just the creeping effect. It's not that it would hit someone right away, but 3 or 4, 5, 8, 10 transactions later, you're just seeing those numbers. And again, it's just the idea that pretty soon now you have one property. It's obviously a commercial business. The only one that can buy it is multiple people getting, well, again, I'm taking the hypothetical to an extreme, but now it should really be regulated as a business. It's not single family residential being rented out, which was the original intent of short-term rentals. Therefore, apply under the special land use, go through the entire process of dealing with it as a business rather than as an STR. And we do have that mechanism.
Anybody have anything more on change in ownership? The next one is 5, license availability. A says initial licenses will be issued on first come, first served basis, subject to limits established by zoning district. Once the cap for a zoning district is reached, new licenses will be placed on a waiting list unless otherwise permitted by amendment or resolution. Question for staff, how does that really work? I envision people camping out at Best Buy, for the Black Friday sales. How would the township deal with that? I'm kind of lost on the concept of why is first come, first serve a thing.
Sure, with every application we get, we stamp it, date received. So I would use that mechanism as they come in. You stamp the document when it came in
Well,
and kind of maintain a list.
on
that
an
way.
ongoing kind of organic basis, that makes perfect sense. However, the day after this thing goes into effect, you're gonna have people lined up out here, even people, I presume, that have no intention anytime soon, short-term running their property. Because by golly, there's a cap on that and I better get in before I miss out entirely. How is that
So,
managed?
when I've dealt with communities for medical marijuana, adult use marijuana, this is a similar circumstance where there's a limitation on the number of applications. You open it at a certain time, they show up, take them in, document who's in the line, and you timestamp them as they come in. And then, but you take all the ones that come in at that time because some of them may not meet the ordinance. And so then those that don't meet, or maybe there has to be revised and resubmit things that then you'll go through. So the first one then that's complete that could be approved, then that would be the first one of, let's say, 6.
But if these are being issued to people and not property, I'm gonna put my name in the hat and then I'll figure out what the property is I want to apply it to.
You need to bring in the full application.
And be
the
approved.
Application's not complete, then you don't get it.
Yeah, step number one with all applications is making sure everything's there and the application itself is complete. So I would say if it's not complete, you lose your spot in the line. I don't think it would be appropriate for us to hold the door open for somebody who just filled out the application but didn't give us any other documentation, how it's going to meet the provisions of the draft ordinance.
And I don't want to get too hung up over this, because I'm not on board with the whole density concept actually. I'm not sure how that is equitable or even enforceable. You know, figure out what percentage on Lake residential, but if they're all right here, that has created a different situation than I think somebody envisioned. Something, a different density, like, these things have to be no closer than 500 feet apart or whatever reason. Not judging whether that's reasonable, but just as an example, how does something like that get dealt with on a first come, first served basis? I've got 3 in my neighborhood, but timestamp gonna take care of that until I get to, yeah, but these 2 are only 75 feet apart, so number 1 and 3, they're proper distance and 2 is out of luck, or I'm just maybe overthinking it, but if we go forward with this, all of a sudden, people are gonna wake up one morning and there's a doggone new Dexter Township ordinance. Maybe it's a problem for the township board to figure out, and township attorney will sort it out, but we're gonna make a recommendation somehow or another. I don't know. It's really just a question. Anybody have anything else on that license availability? Application requirements, so go to C, application requirements. 1, application information. You know, A is name, address, phone number. B, if the owner doesn't reside within 30-minute drive of the property, contact local contact person. C, the number of short-term rental properties within Dexter Township owned by the individual, partnership, or entity. This might be overthinking that, but Sean and I have one, Christy and I have one, Steve and I have one, Chandra and I have one. How many do I own? Do I own, half of 5, or do I own 5, or do I own nothing? How does the township
It says that
view that.
individual, partnership, or entity.
Yep, but I could have 5 different partnerships. How many do I own? Is that? Partnership A has one, partnership B has one. Are you really asking how many the partnership has, or are you asking how many do I have? Because I have 5, but they're under 5 different partnerships.
For that is later on in ordinance, it says that an owner can only have 2 short-term rental properties within the township.
Which I'll get to that too, about how that works, but go ahead.
Right, so, I think that we could clarify that it's just if you're, what I think you're getting at is that you would like it to be that if any individual within the partnership or entity counts as one, and so then you had the one with,
Yeah, I'm kind of
5.
asking that question, because what I think we think of as the usual case, somebody lives out on Portage Lake, they've lived there for a lot of years, golly, I don't want to miss out on this short-term rental thing, so I'm going to come and apply. That's pretty straightforward. Somebody is going to come from Birmingham, and this is going to be their 6th short-term rental. 3 of them are in Dexter Township. But each one of them is its own separate LLC, because that's how I'm going to shelter the rest of the business. Something happens on this one, well, sorry, that one's, I think that's a lot more difficult.
Mr. Chair, if I may put my oar in this bag of worms right now.
Please
Mrs.
do.
Durin. I have mentioned before the property that I own up on Houghton Lake. Actually, I do not own the property on Houghton Lake. That property is owned by Mid-Michigan Lakeshore Estates, of which in the eyes of the state of Michigan, I am the agent for
Okay.
that property. But I do not own it. It is owned, taxed, and addressed officially by the state of Michigan as Mid-Michigan Lakeshore Estates.
Thank you. Yeah, I would anticipate that somebody who's doing this as a commercial venture rather than, they just like to get some income a few weeks out of the year would probably do something like that. That's the way you would set up a business.
Yep.
Anybody have anything else on that or that page? Page 6, which is page 73 of the packet. Anybody have anything on any of that? Page 7, page 74 of the packet. I skipped down to section 5, short-term rental regulations. If anybody has anything before that, please speak up. Okay, 5, short-term rental regulations. Short-term rentals are subject to the following requirements and performance standards. A, rental period. Here's where we get into no short-term rental shall be rented for fewer than 3 consecutive nights, nor for more than 30 consecutive nights per rental period. The 3 gets to what Trustee Abbott was asking earlier, and the 30, the more than 30, just falls out of the definition of short-term rental. B, occupancy standards. All bedrooms must have a door for ingress and egress, blah, blah, blah. 2, the first bedroom intended for short-term rental must be at least 70 square feet. And I'm questioning what is the basis for that size, and for the architect members of the Planning Commission, is there some state or national code regulation for, I know a bedroom has to have a window and it's got to have a closet, last I knew.
So this was something that I had asked to have changed before. And when you go
Because
to
it sounded like
the
it was
chart,
confused with 70 square feet for the first
yeah, when you,
occupant.
right, and when you
Okay.
look at Putnam, City of Dexter, and Freedom Township doesn't have it, but for occupancy, like under Putnam, bedroom 70 square feet for first person, 120 square feet. That's not saying exact. 70 square feet minimum for one occupant plus 50 square feet for each additional occupant. So
Yeah,
it
and
has to
while-
deal with the occupancy. Let me just read this again.
yeah, and that kind of makes sense to me that it's for occupancy. The
It's for
70 square
occupancy,
feet still
not
doesn't,
bedroom
but
size. Yeah, it's per occupant.
And then I think we further complicated on three. I think three is supposed to be more what you're talking about, but what we say on two, the first bedroom must be at least 70 square feet.
We
No.
can change that. That was an error.
Okay, yeah.
And go back to those and.
Okay, and number three says each additional bedroom must be at least 50 square feet, and I'm sure that that's not what we,
No, it
talking
has to
about.
do
that'd be occupancy
Yeah.
per bedroom.
per additional
So
occupant.
maybe just clean that up. But back to my earlier question, what are code or good practice requirements for a bedroom? Because even 70 square feet for one person seems pretty small to me. I mean, how do you make that?
It must
work?
be from something because it was in some other ordinances, so they must be taking it from some type of state or national.
Unless it
code.
got misinterpreted as something, because my concern would be that, okay, I'm going into the short-term rental business. I used to have one 210-foot bedroom, and now I just made that three somehow.
No, it's like 70 square feet would be 7 by 10 for one person, and then add 50 square feet, so that's 120 square feet
To have two people
Like,
in that room.
have two people in that room, so that'd be a 10 by 12.
And that kind of makes sense to me, but 70 square feet for one person or defining a bedroom as something at least 70 square feet, I don't get.
The Michigan Residential Code does have a minimum bedroom size. And I can't tell you exactly what that number is,
Sure.
but it's, but it's something like 70 feet.
Okay, so maybe that's where that came from in somebody's ordinance, huh? Wow,
Yep, 70.
all right.
I think also the short-term rental committee, our concern was that somebody would take a closet and make it a bedroom. So you have some of
Sure.
those big walk-in closets, and I can tell you, the house that we stayed in Newaygo, I was not happy with the size of bedrooms.
But presumably you can really do it in a walk-in closet because it has to have
A window, yeah.
egress and all that stuff, which also presumably the fire department is going to help sort out for us. All right, well, I should have no concern, I guess, about 70 square feet if that's what is standard. Anybody have anything else on that page? Next page. Right at the top, the maximum, this is still in the same section, occupancy standards. Number 4 is the maximum occupancy shall be determined by septic capacity, number of bedrooms, and other health and safety considerations as determined by the township, which I suspect needs to be fleshed out. But I'm wondering, would that be the place to also say, but in no case shall it exceed 10 people? If that's what we're proposing, that a special event is gonna be over 10 people, then I presume the maximum that can be in a non-special event would be 10 people, whether that was what the intent was or not, I'm not sure.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question of our two architects here? Where does septic capacity factor into the occupancy of a home?
The plumbing code.
Okay.
The plumbing code has restrictions.
And at least back in the 80s, when I was on the Board of Health, the size, the square feet of the drain field, well, the number of gallons of septic tank or tanks, multiple tanks, and the number of square feet for the original drain field, and at least used to be 1.5 times that had to be held out for a possible replacement field. There would be some chart that would be based on, I think, number of bedrooms, number of plumbing fixtures.
Yep.
It was, yeah, some calculation.
Thank you.
Off-street parking. So now we're into short-term rental regulations. A was rental period, B was occupancy standards. C is off-street parking. I didn't especially have anything here except noting that this is where it mentions in three. So number one, minimum of one parking space per bedroom with a minimum of 2 spaces required regardless of bedroom count. 2 is parking spaces must comply with what Dexter Township calls parking space. 3, all parking, including guest trailers and recreational vehicles. And this gets into what Commissioner Smith was talking about earlier, I think, kind of like a party bus. Must be accommodated off-street. Guest trailer and recreational vehicles must comply with the requirements of section 16.30 of the Dexter Township zoning ordinance. So it ties back together there.
And again, my concern about just total occupant, total number of people on site is addressed between the occupancy of the unit and then item F that we will come up to, day guests.
Mhm.
So I think that it can be, it'll be covered there.
D is trash removal. E is quiet hours. That complies with the Dexter Township noise ordinance. That brings us up to F, day guests. Daytime guests are permitted, provided that 1 additional off-street parking space is available for every 2 additional guests. And it seems to me that maybe that would be another place to explicitly state with a maximum of 10 people, if that's what the intent was.
Well, then one question I had there, I was trying to glance at the Putnam, um, what they have, and they, I think, use a ratio, 1.5 times the number of occupants for the listing. So that way, it seems that that allows flexibility depending on the size of the unit, but then also it doesn't
Hang on,
allow it.
You need 1.5 parking spaces
No,
for
yeah. Sorry, guests, the number of daytime guests is limited to 1.5 times.
times the number of parking
occupant-
spaces.
Occupants. So if the short-term rental is listed for 4 people, you can have. If you can allow 1.5 times, does that mean you're allowing 6 more or you're allowing up to 6? I didn't catch that in the Putnam one, but it was the concept of a ratio versus a set number. You know, like, what if someone has a 10-bedroom house? Are they allowed to have 10 guests? Or a 1-bedroom house allowed to have 10 guests? If it's a ratio, that sort of implies that the number of guests is going to depend on the size of the rental. Small rental, few guests. Big rental, more guests.
I think mainly what this is getting at is not the number of day guests, but the number of off-street parking spaces for each of those day guests. But it also seems to me that we're still capped at 10 people. Because otherwise it's whatever we called it. A party, a major event or whatever. So that would get to your point, I think, in part, that let's say you had a short-term rental and it was authorized 2 parking spaces. But you were having guests over. You could have up to 8 guests and not exceed the 10, but if you did that, now you'd have to have 4 additional off-street parking spaces in addition to the 2 that were already the minimum requirement of you getting your license. If I'm understanding how that works correctly.
You could add on day guests that the number of daytime guests is limited up to 1.5 day guests per maximum, for the number of maximum occupants not to exceed 10 people.
But this item, although it says day guests, all it says about day guests is that they're permitted.
I'm saying that you could add that provision with both ratio and a cap of 10 if you want.
This is getting at parkings. This is parking spaces, I think.
I don't think so.
I think well, it says, provided that 1 additional off-street parking space is available for every 2 additional guests. So this really gets to parking. It's labeled day guests and I get it. Day guests are permitted, but it's really regulating parking.
So I can change that to parking required for day guests, and then I guess my question back to the
Okay.
planning commission is, do you want to have like, or do you want to have an explicit cap or ratio on the number of day guests?
Well, we've capped all guests at 10, right?
Yes.
So I don't know, is a ratio appropriate? You could have a place that sleeps 2 people, but they're all gonna be around the picnic table and they've got adequate parking, so as long as you didn't have more than 10 on site. I'm not sure what the ratio is going to do for us, as long as we've got a cap of 10. If there was no cap, then the ratio does make sense to
So
me.
maybe I didn't understand correctly. I was reading the cap of 10 was for special events, which in my mind is guests.
We do not allow special events, but more than 10 people, I think de facto becomes a special event.
Yes.
I think that's what we're saying.
Then you just prohibit guests altogether?
Pardon me?
Could you prohibit guests altogether?
I don't know how that would be either workable or advisable, but at this point, everything is hypothetical. We can do whatever.
For day guests, you could put a number 4 up into off-street parking.
Yeah, I
specifically
think-
For day guests.
Yeah, I think Megan's proposed solution works.
Okay, so keep day guests and put in a ratio with a cap of 10?
No, we're talking about parking. So what you were gonna change that to was parking for day guests or something like that. You have to have 1 parking space for every 2 day guests. And maybe we want to reiterate one more time that, but maximum capacity of the whole shebang is 10. And I guess I would interject at this point, if we haven't gotten some concept of how gosh darn hard it's gonna be to understand, enforce. There's a couple more pages to go here.
So can
Anybody
I-
have anything else on that page?
Can I just, apologies, I'm
Please.
jumping back to 3.
Mhm.
There's a definition for special events. Did we effectively, which defines what a special event is, but if we're not allowing special events, then under the definition, can we just say that there's no special events rather than trying to define what a special event is?
Well, special events on page 75G, so this is still under the short-term rental regulations.
Right.
So yes,
It's defined. on
we just
page
defined
3.
it on page 3, and then on page 75, we said special events are not permitted. I think that kind of gets to Megan's thing. You don't regulate it under a definition, so we'd still define what a special event is. It's 10 people or
Oh, I
more,
gotcha. Okay.
or I'm sorry, 10, yeah, 10 or more. So 9 is legal, 10 is illegal. I've been saying that wrong this whole time, more than 10.
If, I'm kind of confused then about what, if you are not having a special event, but you're having up to, 10 guests, max of 10 people, how is that not a special event? If it's
10
not,
people becomes a special event by definition, I guess.
but I mean, we don't allow special events at all. Which is weddings, family reunions and parties. If you have 10 people around a picnic table, is that a party?
It's, by this definition, it's a special event and therefore illegal under ordinance 45. Not even under the zoning ordinance, it's under, township statute, kind of.
That seems like you wouldn't be able to have, yeah.
It does. So what that I think gets to, and probably others of us have been wondering, does 10 make sense?
Well, if
I get
could
my
give-
kids and their spouses together, that's 10, no grandkids.
If I could give you an example, I told you I was at an Airbnb this weekend up north. And so it was for my mom and all her siblings and their spouses came for coffee in the morning. and we sat outside, but that was 11 people. Then there was my mom, my husband. So that would be under this, that would qualify then as a special event, even though it was from 9 o'clock in the morning till 11. And it was outside. And it's a bunch of old people having coffee, so, but it's still, but it's, yeah, well, that wasn't the reunion, that's even bigger, but, so, yeah, so I guess we need to be like, really strict in our definition for excluding.
Well, there's always gonna
Yeah.
be that group of 10 to 15 that are
Yeah.
gonna be quiet, family.
Right.
But then there's gonna be that group of 10 to 12 in the evening that are gonna be more rowdy. And it's gonna be really difficult to differentiate between those two groups of people all the time.
Right.
So you either have to limit the number or
Right.
don't, cause
Yeah.
you can't differentiate between groups like that all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. To me, 10 doesn't seem to be a reasonable number. Cause yeah, it doesn't take much to get family together and, well, like your example, you're over 10.
We
But-
have,
The
We
three
could-
Hellraisers are gonna make more noise Saturday night than the 10 people did or the 20 people did on, Saturday
And
lunchtime.
yeah,
the short-term rental, in my mind, isn't the intent of the
right.
special
Okay,
events.
yeah,
It just
I-
isn't. It's not the intent of the short-term rental.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Let's
with
get
that.
I'm not sure we have the right definition of special events is all.
But
Can we-
if a university and a fraternity at university in Ann Arbor, if Alpha Sigma Sigma decides to have a kegger out here on Portage Lake, I know that never happens, but are we going to be able to, are we even going to try to limit that?
Well, the other problem with that is by regulation, by definition, we extended that Saturday night kegger to 3 nights.
Yes,
We can't let them come in just Saturday night. They gotta be here Friday, Saturday and Sunday nights,
that's right.
whole weekend vendor.
Do we think, cause I like that, we have that, let me go back to that page, I like the idea that there has to be off-street parking space available for guests, so, if your property has a driveway that would accommodate multiple vehicles that are day guests, then your property probably would accommodate. Though I feel like we're narrowing it down enough by having that parking space regulation for day guests, off-street parking, right?
That would seem reasonable, but as Commissioner Smith pointed out, you can also have the party bus drop everybody.
Yeah.
And I don't know, somebody with experience understands that party bus then goes parks a long ways away. So
That's
just
fair.
about everything that we think seems reasonable and it's, Joe and Mary renting out their place. We also have to deal with the other end of that. Like, yeah, the frat house is gonna have a whole weekend event. And they're renting from somebody who lives in Birmingham. To me, it's part of the whole problem that, well, why should that become Dexter Township's problem? Let Putnam deal with that. Or let Hamburg Township deal with that. Why should we put that burden on not only Dexter Township as a unit of government? That's the least of my concerns. It's what have we done to the inadvertently, because everybody had good intentions and crap, that's never gonna happen. But it will.
Mhm.
And maybe some of that is a little quieter now because it's like an open secret. But once this becomes formalized, every line in the ordinance has the opportunity to be challenged. Somebody take them right up to that point and then be on, hey, you go down to the end of the street. When you see the sheriff come, then, you whistle for us and we'll turn the boombox off. Everything in here, there is a way to exploit. All right. Day guests, I think we got that kind of squared away. It's what should parking be for day guests, one spot per 2 day guests, huh? And then here we get into special events are not permitted. We get into H is voting restrictions, flip to the next page, page 76. Rental guests may use the owner's watercraft with permission. And number 2 is any motorized boats belonging to guests shall not be launched or docked at the property.
The question about the boats, I don't have a boat, so I don't, this is why I'm happy. Is there a boater safety certificate that people have to have in order to
Yes.
operate a boat? So can we add that, with written permission as part of the required rental agreement along with their boat safety
Boater
certificate,
safety.
yeah.
Well, would it be more appropriate to
Yes.
just for those who might be out of the area or out of state, just to have a line in there that per Michigan law or whatever it is, the driver of the boat has to have a,
Michigan voters.
rather
license.
than us require it if it's already part of the law.
Mr. Chair, I'll need to double check, but I think boaters license are required for children before the age of 16, but once you get an actual state of Michigan driver's license, you can
Okay, that
operate
makes
any
sense.
type of watercraft, but let me double check that.
I can support with what you're saying. Both my grandkids' sons got their motor safety certificates before they were 16.
All right.
But if you're
Yeah,
over
makes
16,
sense.
Yeah.
you're not required to get one.
Right.
We could add something later on under page 11. I know I'm skipping ahead. But that says, that's requiring that there be a written rental agreement between the owner and the renter. And number 6 says the statement identifying any watercraft available for use with proof of written owner permission is required. The rental agreement must state that the guest owned motorized watercraft must be docked or launched from the rental property, and we could add a provision that they need to have a valid Michigan driver's license or.
Be qualified as a boater, yeah.
There you go.
I noted that on page 9, it says boats belonging to guests should not be launched or docked. And then, it says that again on page 11. It also says if on 11 can't be launched or stored on the property. To me, if you can't store it, it would mean you couldn't bring it.
Yeah.
Which I personally would think that people bringing a boat, depending on what kind of boat it is, could really gum up the works in terms of parking and, interfering with the neighbors' enjoyment. And I don't know if we can prohibit people from bringing their own boats. Either the owner can provide a boat or.
Is it stupid to ask what's the definition of a boat? I think in an earlier context, we were talking only about motorized boats, correct? Which presumably, I think what you're getting at would be on a trailer behind some vehicle, somebody's gonna park in the yard while they run to the store.
Or a pontoon boat.
As opposed to, I've got a kayak strapped to my roof.
Yeah, it says motorized.
Yeah, so we probably should be consistent with the terminology throughout that. We're either gonna define boat as motorized boat, or every place it says boat, just add motorized, I guess. If it's not already there.
Yes, the first time on page 11, it again says motorized, but then later it says boats.
Yeah, and same thing on 9, it says motorized. We understand that it means motorized, but yeah, then when it drops that off, that's kind of ambiguous.
Good point.
Anybody have anything else on page 9? I think that's where we kind of left off. On 10, so for those following along, we're still in the section, short-term rental regulations. We're now up to M, limit on short-term rentals. Item number 1 under that is the maximum short-term rental shall be limited to 1%, 3%, or 5% of the total number of dwelling. And there's a chart. Number 2 is, well, there's a chart under number 4. Number 2 is commercial zoning districts are not subject to the percentage-based cap. 3, short-term rentals are not permitted on mixed zoning lots. 4, as of January 2025, township has determined the following cap per zoning district. And then number 5 is these figures may be reviewed and updated periodically by the township board as an amendment to the ordinance. So my question, and I brought it up a little more harshly last time, but I'm not getting the concept of the percentages. Because if we, and whether it's, the chart shows 5% cap, so lake residential, and I'd have to look that up. This says lakes. I think we actually call it lake residential now, don't we? Even though I might call it lakes from time to time, I think it's, anyhow, lake residential, total dwellings, 852, a 5% cap would be 43. And one of my issues with the percentages is, well, okay, great, 43. If they're spread out all over the place, that's one thing. If they're all right here on this side of, this side of whatever lake, that is a whole different thing, which is why kind of makes sense to me, more sense to me, that there has to be a spacing.
You can
Right.
absolutely do a spacing, and the spacing occurs on a first come, first served basis. So you have the first 10 people line up on day 1. Five of the applications are complete and licenses are given. And so then they're spaced out from there. And then it's a well-used ordinance or zoning technique in order to make sure that there is not a cluster of a certain use in one place. A lot of other places for short-term rentals, what they've done is, they've made sure that there can be so many per block, like in a city. More that type of scenario, but you're not laid out that way. Another thing that you could look at is that you could define lake shores on a map and make sure that there's a cap on those. Or that they need to be, but really, you don't want them next door to each other. The 500 feet distance, the buffer distance is probably the best tool.
So I'm actually not trying to be a pain. Some of that just kind of comes naturally, I guess, but so an example under that scenario, and let's just deal with linear feet, we're not trying to curve around the lake or back lots or something like that, but let's say we set the limit as these can't be more than 100 feet apart. Okay, person A comes in and applies. Person B is 99 feet away, comes in and applies. Person C is 120 feet away and comes in and applies. And person D is 150 feet, say, away, comes in and applies, and they did it in that sequence. Who loses?
Person B doesn't get a license.
Because he's within 99 feet.
Right.
And then the next one, I think, was at 120 feet. Presumably they get it. And the next one is at 150 feet. Presumably they don't get it.
Correct.
If they're, if you're going like this.
Yeah,
If
and
you're
that
not
all
going
kind of
like
makes sense to me. But now what if they apply in the different sequence? So, A applies, that's where our baseline is. B at 150 feet applies. C at 120 feet applies.
Because they're in the two.
Yeah.
They don't get it.
So whoever applies first, I guess, would start the trend when it comes to distances. And
And then everything else is going to be measured off of that.
Township staff would use our GIS services to do the measurements. And I think the commission should consider how wide these lots are. I think, 50 feet is a good standard for these lakefront properties. They're pretty small in terms of width. So I'd consider that when coming up with your number. The state of Michigan, for example, they require 1,500 feet between group daycare homes. So they also didn't want daycare homes clustering together, providing space between those uses.
But I suspect we're not gonna have the enthusiasm for, well, we've got a handful of residential situations like that now. This is gonna be a whole different situation. I think people are gonna be seriously lining up at your door, because golly, if I never thought about it before, I'm gonna think about it now.
So what happened to the 3% and 1% representation on this chart?
We had given it to you in the cover letter that we had sent to you originally, and we just kept the 5% in the draft. So if you would you could make a decision tonight on that or a recommendation, then we can go from there. Or you could leave it to the township board. The ordinance itself, you don't need to make a recommendation. They would just ask for your input.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense.
Okay.
Anybody have anything else on the whole concept of percentages in the different zoning districts?
I mean, I would just say, it seems 1% tax, 29 total. There's supposed to be 20 to 30 now in the township. 1% makes sense to me.
Well, for Lake Residential that has total dwellings of 852, that would be closer to a 3% to get to encompass what we think we have out there now.
But just because somebody has something, that doesn't mean they get to keep it, I guess, if they didn't meet the other requirements.
Well, and
There might be
that's,
people that just fall out of the process because their home cannot actually, under these new standards, meet the
Yes.
criteria to be safely used as an
Yep.
Airbnb.
yeah, it would seem to me that there are some, under this, there are some that are short-term rented now that are gonna fall out of that for that very reason. But I would think there would be a larger number where people are gonna get in line and try to snag their permit, even if they have no intention, which is probably another thing that needs to be added in here someplace. Kind of like issuing a building permit or something. If you haven't shown evidence that you've made use of it in a year or 6 months or whatever, that one goes back into the pool and somebody else.
Well, I think there should be a
Lined up for it.
requirement, that they show proof of the sales tax paid to the state of Michigan. Cause short-term rentals falls, they're supposed to be collecting sales tax. Now, if they're running it through Airbnb collects the money and they may be taking care of the sales tax on your behalf, but you can still get a certificate for that. So they should have to show proof upon renewal that they've been paying the applicable taxes to the state of Michigan. And just to go back to the 1%. So when the short-term rental committee was going over these tables, the 5% just was like a lot. And, the 3% was, okay, but I thought, as we discussed, wasn't 1% like a more palatable amount, because that basically you had people who have been, or it seemed to be operating for years without any incident. And that then maybe we could keep those people, get them under our regulations, get them compliant with the township ordinance, and then maybe not have a tsunami of new short-term rentals. Cause I don't think that really is the goal. That, I don't think we want a whole influx of new short-term rentals, and so putting the cap high, this 5% seems really high, unfortunately, I feel like does that. Creates an influx of more than what we really want.
It seems like we would have inadvertently perhaps created an opportunity.
Right.
To your, excuse me, point about sales tax, it kind of prompted a thought. This goes back many years, but I assume Washtenaw County still has an accommodation ordinance commission and an accommodation ordinance or an accommodations tax that goes on hotels and motels and, you know, room rentals like that. Does anybody,
Doesn't apply to short-term.
okay, and it doesn't apply to bed and breakfast?
That I'm not aware of, but I know it doesn't.
And you're sure that it doesn't apply to short-term rentals?
At least as of 3 or 4 years ago, because, it's not. It's just, it's different, but
Because that's part of what used to fund Visitor and Convention Bureau. I don't know anything about anything anymore. This is like
Well,
30,
I don't
30
know for
years
sure,
ago.
but check that out. And then what we can do is in the renewal is then ask them to submit that they have paid their Michigan taxes and any applicable Washtenaw taxes.
'Cause I like your point. That would be a good way of demonstrating that they're not just sitting on the permit waiting to, yeah, and
Well, that would be the best way to prove it, because how do you prove, like, say you're not using Airbnb and you're actually
Yeah.
using Craigslist? How do you prove that you've been actively using your permit? So paying the sales tax in the state of Michigan is your proof, and it should be, your permit process is gonna have a list of documents that are required, and that should be one of them.
Is, Mr. Chair, is sitting on a permit or a license, as you suggest, is that a problem? If a homeowner wanted to have the right, reserve the right to rent their home out, but not use that right necessarily, is that a issue for us?
I'm gonna sound like I'm advocating for the whole concept, which I am not, but yeah, the problem I would see with that was somebody would sit on a permit. Just because maybe someday I'll want to do that. It seems like they should not apply for the permit until they are ready to do it. Now, they could come in and get the permit, comply with everything and still not do it, which seems, you know, a little bit weird maybe. But if we're really in favor of this, then if we think it's a good thing and we think there ought to be 43 permits issued in Lake Residential or maximum of, it seems like we are doing a disservice by allowing somebody to sit on it and not allow the next person in line who's actually ready, willing, and able to actually execute.
I think the 1-year renewal may help with that. I think along with the tax forms, maybe we could require them to show us, booking information at the time of renewal. Like one person could book their house out for a couple weekends out of the year. The other could do every weekend throughout the summer. I think there's going to be a big, difference between certain operators. But I think the year renewal, as along with tax forms or booking information, that may cover that. Make sure people aren't just sitting on these licenses.
I think that makes sense.
You sit on a license and not rent your home, and you do the distance of 100 feet where you don't have 2 licenses within 100 feet, then your neighbors could never. obtain
You
a
oughta
license.
go snag one right now because of that, yes. Yep.
Well, the other thing too to remember is that permit is not gonna be a inexpensive process. The documentation, just from Multi-Lakes, I looked at the prices in there, those are not nickel and dimes, those are serious coin that you're gonna spend, so I just don't see somebody spending that kind of money to obtain a permit they're gonna sit on for a year.
Right, in addition to the township inspection, the fire
Right,
department
right.
inspection.
Be a lot of
Yes.
work to sit on.
Right.
Maybe.
I think that the people who actually apply are gonna be the ones who are actually gonna.
And we have not even yet addressed seasonal businesses and paying taxes in the state of Michigan. Which unfortunately I know too well.
Anybody have anything else on the percentages? We have some sort of consensus that percentages all on their own, or these percentages aren't the right approach, or maybe percentages, but you can't have them within a certain number of feet. And maybe if we were to put this thing forward, we just, kick all of that to the township board. You figure out, what these blanks ought to be, whether it's 1, 3, 5%, and whether it's 100 feet, 500 feet, 50 feet in between.
I think there was a late recommendation from the committee, was there not, toward the 1%? I thought I remembered that, maybe I'm remembering incorrectly. Anyway, I would be, if this ordinance were to move forward, be recommended by this board, the 1% cap and a 500-foot separation would be what I would think should happen.
Okay, the 1%, to the best of our understanding, would not provide for everybody who seems to be doing it now. That comes closer to 3%, I think.
Yes,
But some
And-
people will probably drop out because their
that's,
facilities are not gonna make it.
Yeah.
that's right.
And I'm not arguing that it shouldn't be 1%. I'm just envisioning that there will be a real mess outside the door when those applications come up.
Fletcher, you also said something.
Not
about
my problem, I guess.
Did you say that correctly?
I would say, that's a typical lakefront width.
Say that again?
Some 50-foot, I would say, is a good average for lakefront width. Some of them are even smaller than.
I thought we had predominantly 30 or below 50.
It has to be 50 in order to have a short-term rental. You have to have at least 50 feet of a lot of width before you get a short-term. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we didn't, that's not in here anyplace.
Oh,
Well, what we were talking about is 50 feet in between. So you couldn't have like 3 in a row. You could have one, skip one, have another one.
I would, you could also put a lot, like you could say you have to have 50 feet. Because that, I mean, none of these would make it. If you had a 50-foot lot width, none of these would
Right.
make it. And these seem really close to me.
And that goes back to kind of my original concern that the lots should conform with the current zoning ordinance for
Yeah.
the zoning district that they're in. So like residential on a sewer would be half acre with 50 feet, I think, frontage,
Yeah,
or 50 feet lot width.
it's the minimum lot width.
However,
So-
Megan would figure out how to make that work.
Yeah, so what you would do is you would do a minimum lot size and a minimum lot width, and I would just say, just you know, I guess you could do it by zoning district. I don't think you have that many non-conforming rural residential lots or agricultural lots. But that's what I would advise you to do, is to have a minimum lot width and a minimum lot size for that particular use.
Okay.
And we don't have to figure that out tonight, especially as we're getting kind of late, but for next meeting, we might want to have either some details in mind or some kind of fuzzy concept of what we want to send on to the Board of Trustees if we get to that point. Anybody have anything else on that page? If not, flip to page 11, which is page 78 of the packet. For those following along, I should probably back up. We're in section 6. Rental agreement requirements. A is all short-term rentals should be subject to a written agreement, blah, blah, blah. And it talks about maximum number of occupants, location of parking. Gets down to, my concern was that the last item in that list, number 9, a statement that all renters and their guests must comply with the township's short-term rental ordinance and that violations may result in fines or eviction. Eviction by whom is my question. I get it that somebody, sheriff, somebody could come out and issue a citation as a violation of the Dexter Township Ordinance 45, but who's actually gonna evict somebody? Is that, I mean, is that workable? Is that for real? The owner would have difficulty coming out there and say, okay, you violated this, you're out of here.
Well, I think that the owner, that should squarely be put on their shoulders. They're the operator. They're the ones who chose to rent. There's, I think we talked about that there has to be an agent within, what was it, a 45-minute,
I think we said
30
30 and 30.
30 would be better. And so I think that, and the fine should land squarely on the operator. We didn't pick who you rented to. And if you're gonna rent to people who are gonna run amok, you should pay the fine. Then you won't rent to people like that. Maybe you'll, as an operator, will be a little more choosy about who you rent to.
Yes, which makes more sense to me that the way this is written, it's, hey, renter, you're gonna get in trouble, and we, the township, really has no relationship with the renter. It's, hey, the owner, yeah,
Sure.
you're on the hook for that.
Yeah, planning department and anyone who enforces this ordinance won't be able to go out and evict tenants.
Yeah, that would have to be
immediately. We have
something
to
I-
go through the due process and the correct channels to issue penalties and fines against the owner. It's not the tenant who would get the fine. It's the property owner.
And if the owner
Maybe we
did
should
not
clean that up.
evict or did not comply with some other aspect of this, then that's part of their evaluation for their annual renewal.
Would it be satisfactory to change the last word in paragraph 9 from eviction to penalties? I think that makes it more explicitly clear what we're saying here.
Well, I think penalties is actually a good word, because a penalty could be, depending on the severity, it could be a revocation of your permit.
Yes, and I'm not sure that eviction would even pass the township attorney, because that typically has a legal meaning with a real process around it that we're not talking about in this case. All right. B is a copy of the signed rental agreement must be made available to township upon approach. C, any advertisement or listing of the property shall include 1, the maximum occupancy, 2, the number of approved off-street parking spaces, 3, a note that special events are not permitted, and probably also include that that's X number of people. And 4, a statement that boats not owned by the short-term rental occupants or property owner are not allowed to be launched or stored on the property. And we would want to add, you know, or clarify that's motorboats. But my question is, how is that enforced? And what's the penalty or remedy? Is that,
The advertising?
yeah,
I think,
yeah, I get it if, I get it if, you know, the local newspaper, sometimes you've got an ad, oh, Croy, they didn't comply with the ordinance. That's pretty easy to figure out, but who's gonna scour all of the various short-term rental websites to find that out? Are we just throwing something out there because it's a good idea, but if it's not enforceable,
Yeah, I
we
don't
shouldn't even
know.
have it in there?
I
think on Airbnb, you already see a lot of these.
Yeah.
You already see these listings in there, like the maximum number of people that can stay. That no special events are allowed.
Well, and maybe that's part of the enforcement mechanism that the people have to submit their Airbnb or Verbo or whatever listings, have a copy of that provided to the township. So Fletcher doesn't have to go out there and look
Yeah.
that up himself.
I think my interpretation of this is either a digital listing, Airbnb, VRBO. I know my grandparents personally, they don't advertise online. They have written rules inside their rental.
So they charge you
Um,
when you,
Right,
That's
so
all
I
that's here
think
for.
the advertisement could be either in the dwelling itself or digitally online, whatever means of showing their renter the rules, I think would suffice.
okay,
I mean, I think this is just a mechanism to require that these are listed in advertisements. And so really where it would come into play is on the enforcement end. If somebody brought their own boat, used it, then one of the violations of the ordinance is not only that they brought their own boat, but if that wasn't explicitly in the advertisement, they couldn't. They might claim they didn't know, and so then it was bad on the owner for not. We're following the requirements of the ordinance.
Mr. Chair, question, further clarification on C4. Is a kayak a boat?
now I think we need to add motorboats in this. I think
Okay.
that from the earlier discussion, wherever this says boat that doesn't already say motorboats, we need to add motor to it.
I
Yeah,
think
for that
that,
very reason.
because I know a lot of customers like to bring their own kayaks and paddleboards up, which this would prohibit that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anybody have anything on, anything more on that page? Anything on page 12? Bottom of page 11, section 7 enforcement policy. That runs onto page 12. The bottom of page 12 is section 8, cost township taxpayers. I think that goes to page 13 then. B, no portion of these responsibilities shall place an undue or increased financial burden on general taxpayers of Dexter Township. I think there's a redundancy there. We should just scratch out undue. I think the committee's idea was that none of this should be borne by township general fund. So undue is somewhat vague. I think the part that's clear is the intent is that establishing this ordinance and enforcing this ordinance does not increase the cost to the general fund.
If the board had mentioned that they were open to the concept of an enforcement officer or something, then does our percentage cap that we're setting have to be high enough to cover the cost of that person?
I don't think that that's actually the calculation, whatever the, because the cap doesn't even matter in that aspect, I don't think. It's how many permits did we issue? And an enforcement officer is gonna cost $120,000 with benefits, and we got 10 permits. So it's whatever I just figured out, $12,000 per permit then. I think that's what the math ends up being. It's not really what's possible, it's what's actual.
So the cost of the permits will be set based upon the cost of the township.
It seems like that. Now, I don't know, that's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. I want to apply for the permit, what's it gonna cost? Well, I'm not gonna know if you're the only one, it's gonna cost you $100,000. I don't, not for us to figure out maybe, but I think that's how the math works on it.
And the township board is responsible for approving a fee schedule every year. So the planning commission could just refer that the township board really consider the prices to cover.
You know,
These
that's a good
burdens.
point. That's kind of like the fire runs. You take a stab at what it's gonna be year one, and ever after, it's based on the previous year's exposure, the previous year's history.
Yep, that's a good point. The following year, things could drastically change depending on how the previous year went.
Yeah, so the only thing you know for sure is what happened last year, I guess. Section 9, emergency contact. My question there was, to whom are neighbors supposed to complain? The emergency contact is one thing, but I'm not sure I saw in here any place mechanism for, here's the number that neighbors call if something is getting out of hand. And that first call, I don't think is to the township or the sheriff, it's to whoever the resident agent is for the property. Anybody else have anything on page 80?
I think that, 7 days is too long to have the change notified. If this thing is being ran continually, I think I'd like 3 days.
That seems reasonable. And just below that, which is essentially the end of this thing, is section 10, posted information. A, the short-term rental address shall be clearly posted on the exterior of the dwelling, at the roadside, blah, blah, blah. B, the owner or local contact person shall ensure that the following is in clearly visible and accessible, and that has the street address. This is like emergency information, major cross streets, instructions for emergencies like call 911, contact information for the local contact person, diagram of fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, etc. Maximum overnight occupants allowed per the approved license. Statement prohibiting overnight guests beyond those identified in the rental agreement. And it goes on to page 14, which is 81 of the packet. Approved parking locations, maximum number of vehicles. Number 8 is instructions for the mechanical systems. 9 is a copy of the ordinance regulations. 10 is notification that an occupant or a guest may be cited or fined. 11 is illustration of the property boundaries, including location of docks and other, and it seems to me that those ought to be staked out somehow, but I'm not sure what the right answer is to that. I'm not sure that just an outline drawing, but that may be something that the neighbors adjacent want to stake out the property lines, just so those people know that problem, is maybe not our issue. And then 12, it addresses pets. Section 11 is the effective date. Section 12 is the severability clause. 13 is the repealer clause, and that's the end of the document. So having gone through that and recognizing that it's coming up on 8:45, what does this group want to do with this? I don't want to restate what I've already stated, but if I condensed it into a sentence or two, I think this is sufficiently complicated. It is potentially perilous to the township and to the existing residents and property owners of the township. I don't see a need to have short-term rental. Let me rephrase that. I don't see the need to permit short-term rentals within Dexter Township. And if it turns out that that's a bad decision, it's a whole lot easier to revisit that in a couple of years than it is to, well, this is the best we could do. It seems reasonable. And the township is dealing with problems that you can't really unring the bell at that point. You can make some modifications, but it might be hard to ungrandfather some of those things depending on, you know, how the ordinance is set up, so. My preference is that we address the definition in the zoning ordinance. And then add to the zoning ordinance that short-term rentals are explicitly state in the zoning ordinance that short-term rentals are not permitted in Dexter Township. What does anybody else want to do? Because we're at the point of the meeting where we need to figure out what we want our next meeting to be. It's going to be presumably a public hearing on something. I will fill the silence. Public hearing could be on this thing and we can, you know, choose up sides at the next meeting.
Well, I mean, I don't know that we could go, because we talked about a lot of changes to this, you know, doing the 500 feet, so we did already tweak this, plus we haven't seen the Putnam ordinance, so I don't know that we could go through what we have here next meeting.
And while that makes sense to me, I think the township board is on. I don't remember from speaking with the supervisor, I know that he laid out what Fletcher mentioned earlier about the township board is gonna have, you know, kind of an irregular meeting schedule in August. But I'm not sure that I figured beyond that. Okay, so what happens if, I mean, what you're talking about, essentially, we would delay our process a month. So we would be having a public hearing. Let me back up. Our July meeting, we would be dealing with whatever staff comes up with these changes, incorporating any other good ideas based on public comment. We know for sure, take a look at the Putnam Township ordinance. And at the July meeting, we would be in a position to give some direction to what we want for a public hearing in August, which puts us a month off of what the supervisor was expecting we do. Now, maybe that is of no consequence, because I know part of the August irregular meeting schedule was going to be, you know, who was available when and all of that, and didn't want this to come to the township board at a bad time. Maybe it doesn't matter at all if it doesn't come to the township board until their September meeting would be our first opportunity.
Sure, can I
Yes, ma'am.
offer a recommendation on path forward? I would recommend that in July, we hold a public hearing on the zoning ordinance amendments only. You went over those, you gave us some input, we could put those forward and you could make changes after that public hearing. We could also make changes based on your conversation tonight to the draft ordinance, but you do not need to make a recommendation on that ordinance by state law. You
Okay.
are surely an advisory body, and so what we could do is make those changes. You could look at Putnam's, and then if you just had some summary statements or just and to have your discussion as the minutes to go to the township board when they meet in August. That way they would have all of your wisdom and discussion for them when they were making some of those decisions.
So the main change to the zoning ordinance would be the definition, but then we'd get into the where they are permitted uses.
So if you're going by my recommendation of what to do, your decision at this point would be to either take what you discussed tonight and take what is before you tonight and have a public hearing on that. Or to change it per the chair's recommendation and have a public hearing on that. And then you make a recommendation to the township board.
But would that be meaningful because the proposed zoning text amendments reference Township Ordinance 45, which is non-existent?
You would be saying that rides with, and in your recommendation to them, you would say, we're recommending this and tie barring it to a passage of an ordinance 45.
So after that public hearing, when we are having our deliberations, would be the appropriate time for, okay, now it's time to take a vote. Do you want to just have the definition or the definition and then it's permitted with the references to ordinance 45?
We could bring both versions to you, and you could have a public hearing on both. And make it, and make a recommendation that night on those two. On one of those two.
If, based on
Okay.
what, the chair said earlier, that he's inclined to just say they should be not allowed. If we had an ordinance that said, we don't think they should be allowed, had a public hearing on that. And then that went to the board, and the board for some reason said, oh, we think they should be allowed, but then they kick that back to us for further consideration, or how would that work?
Per your zoning ordinance, it should, but the way that your attorney has interpreted the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, I think that at times she's given the township board the advice that they could make substantial changes at their board level.
Which is what happened with the keeping of animals when we had column G or 6 or whatever the heck it was out there with maximum number of critters. The township board, the attorney wasn't there, but they got word from the township attorney that, yeah, they could just eliminate that column. So, yeah, that'd be along those same lines, I guess.
So whatever decision, I think what you should take away from this is whatever decision you make as a recommendation, you're not painting the township board into any corners. You can, and then also your responsibility by state laws to make a recommendation on the zoning ordinance amendments. The township board has said they would like to have your input on the ordinance, but I don't think that needs to be 100, that at the same level of perfection or to have the same level of consensus that a zoning ordinance amendment would.
So if we had the public hearing on the zoning ordinance and it's pretty much as it's stated here, when it goes to the township board, if the township board did not want to entertain short-term rentals, they could make the changes in here, or vice versa.
Or
What we send to them would be, okay, here's the definition, and they're not permitted any place. They could make the changes necessary to allow them if that's what they wanted, and then they could take whatever the status is of the draft ordinance 45 and go through their ordinance process on it. Okay. Any questions? Anybody have any difference of opinion? Seems like that's what we ought to do. So are you proposing that you will give us, like a lot of times we'll have, okay, here's the thing. You can say yay, nay, or these changes. You're going to be a little more digital in this case, that here's the one where if you want to recommend no short-term rentals, here's the version of this thing that does that. And if you want short-term rentals, here's the version that does that. So we pick A or B, and then we've also got the option of, well, somewhere in, this one needs to be modified or something.
The versions, the version A and the version B, and we would give you motions to
Gotcha.
recommend approval or denial of either of those to the township board.
So the only potential deficiency we have in this is if you guys could take a look at the recreation conservation and change that question mark into whatever you think it ought to be. And then we'll have the discussion like Commissioner Mayor's question or comment earlier. Well, maybe we shouldn't have these things in Lake Residential anyhow. We can have the conversation about whether these are all Ps or something else when the time comes. But yeah, that one, I think we probably need some guidance as to I can think of
I would say.
a couple of cases where it could potentially be something somebody would want to do. Cause unless I'm just totally confusing that, it seems to me that there is a small development on a piece of property, acreage that has frontage on one of the lakes, I don't remember which, where it was a camp, and that's where I don't remember. It wasn't the Boy Scout camp, it wasn't the Bird Art Shirley, it wasn't but there was camp store, thank you. And I think they put what, like 6 houses, or the planning commission approved maybe 6 houses or something like that. So it may be that there really is something in RC that,
Helpful if we give you a map that showed any RC zoned parcels that were being used for single family use.
perhaps. The one I'm thinking of, I think is kind of an anomaly, but it doesn't seem like it should be excluded if everything else is.
That's a fairly easy map for us to do as long as we can get some.
But you can also figure out then within that, I think within the past few years, 3 years, maybe something like that. I don't know, time flies. You remember that, Steve? It was,
Yes,
so yeah, it would have been within the past few years, I guess.
We can work together to get you a map.
All right, thank you.
I believe it was 18 when we approved that. 2018.
Oh, much longer ago than I thought. But anyhow, yeah, you'll find it. All right, so I'm taking that as our consensus. Anybody have an opposing point of view? If not, we will scream headlong into item 9, approval of the planning commission minutes from the May 27th meeting. I think I had a couple of comments. Does anybody want to go first? So on page 2 of 5 of the minutes, which is page 83 of the packet, few lines from the bottom under discussion items, if Dexter Township were to prohibit short-term rentals, who would be harmed and to what extent? I think that is just a typo, it's supposed to be to what extent. And then I wasn't sure on page 3 of 5, so page 84 of the packet, but I guess this is the 4th line up. Board of Trustees Rep Abbott was asked to check with the Township Board to see if they were amiable. I think maybe amenable was the better choice, but I'm not sure that I care strongly about that. I think that was maybe the intention. And then on page 4 of 5, page 85 of the packet, this is also 4 lines from the bottom, I guess. Township can protect themselves against a lot of lawsuits if it follows its master plan, should be ITS, no apostrophe. And the other thing I just found amusing under 12 concerns of everybody. Unknown to Fletcher, he set the thermostat to 70, but the setting was on heat instead of air conditioning.
Move to strike.
It seems like a level of detail that, although I found amusing, I'm not sure is necessary. But anyhow, that's all I had. I'm okay with keeping that in there. Anybody have anything else or disagreement with any of the changes that I mentioned?
When it comes to concerns.
I am always at your mercy because I say some stuff that, doesn't really need to be in the public record. You could. I never see it. I don't see it until it comes out here. Oh, I got you.
it's not.
I'll keep that in mind. If nobody has anything else, could we have a motion to approve the minutes of the May 27 meeting, please? Moved by Abbott, support by Birch. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Item 10, correspondence. I think Fletcher has provided hard copies and forwarded any correspondence that did not seem to go to everybody. Is there anything that we might be missing or in addition to that?
Nope, what's in the packet and on your desk physically is all the correspondence received prior to this meeting.
Thank you. Number 11, Township Board of Trustees update. Trustee Abbott, anything for us?
Well, as stated earlier, we did set a date for August 12th for a Board of Trustee public hearing on this short-term rental issue. We'll also set an August 27th Board of Trustee date for strategic plan. It's a strategic plan update session. It is open to the public. So there will be no regular Board of Trustee meeting for August. One of the things that happened at the meeting was the purchase of an easement on the Esch property that was made. It's been going through the process. I think it's like a 3-year process. The purchase price, I want to give you these numbers. I know it's late, but I want you to feel good about all the grants we received. So it was a $1,152,000 parcel. The federal grant was 29% of that price. The state grant was 39% of the price, and the county grant was 22% of that price, leaving the preservation fund to pay only $118,640. So we should all be very proud of our land preservation committee. There's also something that I brought forward. We did set a new planning fee schedule, like Fletcher mentioned. I did something I put forward, and we had a discussion on it at this last meeting, so we will be voting on it at the next meeting. Is that during the short-term rental committee meetings, we were told story after story of people who felt too vulnerable to be able to file a complaint. And while complaint information is part of the Freedom of Information Act, it doesn't have to be readily given. So I am proposing, and we will be voting on it next month, that complaint information to be held private, and that if somebody needs that information, they can file a Freedom of Information Act to gain that information. And my hope is that will ease some of the vulnerability for some of our older seniors who are concerned about retribution if they were to file a complaint about their neighbor. So, and we passed resolution 25-698, which was approved. That was approved declaring Dexter Township a welcoming township. That's a lot.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Item 12, concerns of Planning Commission members, Director of Planning and Zoning, Township Supervisor, Recording Secretary. Start over with Megan. Anything? Fletcher?
No concerns.
Commissioner Mayor?
I just do find it interesting because this seems like a really big topic, this short-term rental, that there isn't more members of the public here. And I would like to thank those who showed up, and I think you came last month and you're here again. So I do appreciate your interest in this topic and all the materials you've given us. Very helpful. Thank you.
On that point, Megan and Fletcher, anybody have any idea? At one time, I thought the state was looking at taking this issue over, kind of like the renewable energy. Anybody know where that is?
It never. So there was a bill. The bill was much better in terms of previous bills had just preempted local control over short-term rentals. The last bill that was introduced looked to do a lot of the things that are in your proposed ordinance in terms of having postings, having what has to be on the listings, some safety concerns and inspections. I've never heard that got out of committee, but I haven't tracked it.
All right, thank you. Just kind of a stray thought, because we're in the thick of it and we haven't heard anything on that for quite a while. Commissioner Berry,
None.
Commissioner Hurd,
None.
Birch,
None.
Abbott on any, Don? Smith,
None.
Ms. Miller? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all for the, long and I think productive meeting. Brings us up to item 13, the second, call to the public. Same routine. If you want to say anything to us, please step up, make sure the mic is on, name and address for the record. Didn't mean to wear you out. Come on.
I would propose to be able to submit some additional materials. In writing, regarding these issues, some of the issues that you raised today, all of you. I don't know how we're gonna put the cap on the can of worms. But the cap is off, and I think we need to figure out how to put the cap back on. For everyone's benefit, to keep the costs down. The only thing that I like is, I don't like to be on the back foot, I like to be on the front foot. And I don't want the township to be on its back foot in any way, manner, or form. I play defense, and I think we have to think about, if you're gonna go forward with something, is it bulletproof? Is it solid? Has it been tested? Will it be tested? Because someone's, if they're not happy and they got enough money, they're gonna file a lawsuit. And you don't want that. You want it as bulletproof as possible. So, I know that, Linda filed some additional materials. Jenny and I will file some additional materials. Our best interest is in the best interest of the township, which is in the best interest of the residents. So I want to thank you for your time and consideration. These are tough issues. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a suggestion, I guess, anything that you want to send to us, probably the cleanest way is, yeah, send it to Fletcher and he'll distribute it to us to make sure everybody gets it.
We've been using that protocol.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if that mic is on or still on or not, but if you check, please.
Oh, yeah. And if, we should tell us green.
Okay, it's green. I'm Linda Salver. And it's kind of been fun watching you guys.
Speak up, we can't.
I am very vocally challenged. I'm sorry. I have throat issues. It's been kind of fun watching you guys wrestle with the same things that the short-term rental committee already wrestled with. So I watched Alicia and Chandra and just thought you guys are a wealth of information. I appreciate all the questions you're asking. They're all so appropriate, so appropriate. So we were talking about limits and your questions about distribution amongst the lakes were good ones. I just want to remind you there's 14 lakes. Okay. Distances, I sent you how close together the houses are. I'm glad that you're looking at that, and I think all my neighbors will be too. You talked about watercraft. Watercraft is governed by the state of Michigan. We looked into this a little bit with the short-term rental committee. Actually, if a homeowner allows a guest to bring a boat and it moors overnight, they need to get a marina permit. Eagle regulates this. In terms of what are they, boater safety permits? They're not required of people. I think it's 1970 something or prior. I've taken the boater safety twice, so I consider myself an admiral. And this weekend, the lakes were the busiest I've seen them. Lot of people coming in at the public launch, lot of boats going the wrong way on the lakes. Nobody patrolling. Who would look at your boater safety certificates of your renters if you are crazy enough to let them use your motorized watercraft? For one thing, boats are expensive. The liability is expensive. Your insurance agent should be advising you not to provide this because that is a huge liability. Somebody's hurt on your boat or damages property next to you. So boats are a little more complicated, I think, than we understand. And Eagle in the state of Michigan governs some of that. I think we have some of that in one of the packets, if I remember right. Trying to think of what else. There were so many things going through my head while you were doing this. You brought up attendance, these meetings. I'm floored that there aren't more people here. But I also am floored that when I'm walking down the street and I meet a new neighbor, they have no idea this is a discussion item. They're shocked when they hear that there might be an ordinance that's going to impact their neighborhood. And then they say, oh, I can't make the meeting. I say, send a note, register what you feel so everybody knows. And then they say, but what happens to that? Do they remember every meeting that I already told you why I don't think this is a good idea or why I really want it? Lastly, we talked a little bit about fees and taxes. So I owned a short-term rental in another state. I think I mentioned it at the last meeting. We were required to be in a commercial hotel zone in order to operate short-term rentals where I was, but there were a lot of illegal ones. When you have a municipality that demonstrates that they will enforce, it makes a huge difference. Word gets out and people stop trying to do things illegally. When neighbors know that they can report and it will be enforced, makes a huge difference. Right now, everybody feels they have to police their neighbors. You're not comfortable with it. You fear retaliation. So what we had was, you talked about tax rates and proving that you paid your state of Michigan taxes. We had hotel taxes. We also then had a municipality tax. We had to pay a tax to the state of Hawaii, to our local island. It was additional taxes that municipalities can enact for people who want the privilege of operating a short-term rental. Granted, I passed all that cost onto every renter, but every year I had to prove to the state, really quarterly, I had to file a quarterly report. I had to show them all of my rentals, who rented, when they rented, what money I brought in, and prove that I paid my taxes. They moved to an online system, so it became much easier. But that's a cost of doing business, right? Any company has to prove that they're paying their taxes. Oh. I'm still hoping that you guys think this is not appropriate for our community, and it does not align with master plan. If we have to allow it, let's be really careful. All across the nation, municipalities are trying to change, put the genie back in the bottle. It's very hard. Read about Traverse City, Saugatuck, read about Tosca, read about Barcelona, read about Italy. It's not working in residential areas. Just isn't. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Jenny Morgan. I live at 7905 Tower.
Turn the mic on. I think it just turned off. I think it went off. We may have to replace the batteries. Very, very top. There's a button right where you're, there you go. Is it green?
No, it's red.
It has to be green to be on.
And it's red.
Just you sorting it out. Please come visit my house.
Yeah, batteries. That's okay, but I'll yell.
Yes, I'm in favor of banning it. It's just too difficult to figure out. There's a lot of problems with it. I would like to send you an email. The thing that I want to leave you with tonight is the problem of licenses versus permits. You issue licenses to people, you can issue permits to properties. This is addressed in the Putnam ordinance. That's a little bit clearer, that he's not gonna present the same kind of due process issues and licensing and all that other kind of stuff that goes along with it. So in putting that together, that's one thing to keep in mind. I will leave you with a clean copy of the Putnam ordinance. I will send you another one in an email with all my thoughts about your wonderful questions, because they were absolutely incredible. And so thank you very much. And we'll get time for some kind of TV tonight. I don't know. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none, public comment will be closed. Item 14, future agenda items. Anybody have anything? Fletcher and I spoke briefly about one that really should have occurred to me a few months back when we were, or a little longer ago than that, when we were dealing with a particular flashing sign or a sign that was going to be changeable. And our ordinance says something like an hour. You can't change that up. Now, I know there are at least a couple in the township that are going, like that, seconds. I don't know the status of them. I don't know if they were grandfathered. I don't know. But anyhow, an hour seems kind of excessive. So somewhere when we got a little bit of a slow month, Fletcher will come back to us with something that's more reasonable. But that's all on my mind for future agenda items.
Mr. Chairman, bring up, there was something that has been a future agenda item for quite a while that Commissioner Mayor brought up. And that
Oh,
was
yeah.
the adding a license for wildlife rehabilitation facilities. That has been on.
Yeah, the keeping of animals, so we allow, licensed rehabilitation. We gotta get that on there yet. Thank you. And do we have anything else? Not a motion to adjourn would be kind of nifty.
I was so moved.
Moved by Mayor, is there support? By Barry? All those in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
All those opposed, no. Motion carried, meeting's adjourned.
Yes, I'll go ahead.
And it's still daylight. Look at that. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Slow process.
Bye.